Emile, or On Education, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Quotes: Emile, or On Education, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, is a revolutionary treatise that explores the nature of education and human development, offering an idealized vision of how individuals can grow to achieve true personal freedom. Rousseau presents Emile, an imaginary pupil, as the model for an education that respects and nurtures a child's innate potential, emphasizing the importance of experience, individual learning pace, and natural curiosity. In this work, Rousseau rejects the rigid, authoritarian educational methods of his time, advocating instead for an approach that respects the developmental needs and unique characteristics of each child. The themes of nature, individuality, and freedom are central, as Rousseau argues for an education that enables personal growth rather than imposing societal norms prematurely. Quote 1. As it leaves the hands of the author of things, everything degenerates in the hands of man. Humans, in their pursuit of control, impose their will upon nature, altering its original form. In attempting to shape nature, man confuses and disrupts natural elements, resulting in deformations. However, Rousseau points out that this is paradoxically necessary, since humans, if left unshaped by society, would be even more vulnerable. The forces of prejudice, authority, and societal influence would corrupt and stifle natural growth, making it vital for humans to cultivate and direct this growth consciously. Quote 2. The first education is the most important, and this first education belongs incontestably to women. If the author of nature had wanted it to belong to men, he would have given them milk with which to nurse the children. Rousseau emphasizes the pivotal role of mothers in early childhood education, suggesting that nature has assigned this responsibility to women by providing them with the physical means to nurture children. He believes that women have a greater influence on education, given their natural connection to the child, and that this maternal role is essential for the proper development of the child. Quote 3. We are born weak. We need strength. We are born totally unprovided. We need aid. We are born stupid. We need judgment. Everything we do not have at our birth, and which we need when we are grown, is given us by education. Rousseau highlights the vulnerability of humans at birth, emphasizing that we are born lacking essential capabilities, like strength, judgment, and knowledge. He argues that education is crucial in filling these gaps, shaping individuals to be capable and complete beings. The development of our faculties, guided by nature and experience, is what enables us to fulfill our potential. Quote 4. Plants are shaped by cultivation, and men by education. If man were born big and strong, his size and strength would be useless to him until he had learned to make use of them. Rousseau draws a parallel between the cultivation of plants and the education of humans, stating that just as plants need care to grow properly, humans need education to become capable. He believes that if humans were born fully developed, they would not have the understanding needed to use their abilities effectively. Education, therefore, is not just about physical growth, but also about learning to use one's capacities. Quote 5. He alone in whom they all coincide at the same points and tend to the same ends reaches his goal and lives consistently. He alone is well raised. Rousseau suggests that true education involves the alignment of natural growth, social influence, and personal experiences. Only when these different forces are harmonized can a person achieve true self-consistency and fulfillment. A well-raised individual is one whose development is in harmony with these various educational influences. Quote 6. It is less a question of keeping him from dying than of making him live. To live is not to breathe. It is to act. It is to make use of our organs, our senses, our faculties, of all the parts of ourselves which give us the sentiment of our existence. Rousseau asserts that life is about more than mere survival. It is about actively engaging with the world and making use of one's abilities. He criticizes approaches to education that are overly protective, arguing instead that children should be allowed to develop their faculties through experience. True living involves making the most of our capacities and embracing life fully, rather than merely trying to avoid death. Quote 7. The man who has lived the most is not he who has counted the most years, but he who has most felt life. Rousseau redefines what it means to live a full life, suggesting that it is not about longevity, but about the depth of one's experiences. A person who truly lives is one who has felt life intensely, making the most of each moment. He contrasts this with those who merely exist without fully engaging with their lives, emphasizing that quality of experience is more important than the number of years lived. Quote 8. The true nurse is the mother. The true preceptor is the father. Rousseau underscores the roles of parents in the upbringing of their children. He argues that the mother, as the natural caregiver, should nurture the child, while the father, as the educator, should guide the child's development. This division of responsibilities, with both parents deeply involved, is crucial for ensuring the holistic growth of the child. Quote 9. A father, when he engenders and feeds children, does with that only a third of his task. He owes to his species men. He owes to society sociable men. He owes to the state citizens. Rousseau believes that fatherhood goes beyond merely providing for one's children. A father has a duty to raise individuals who can contribute to humanity, society, and the state. This means fostering moral and civic values in children, ensuring they grow to be responsible, socially conscious citizens. It is not enough to simply care for them physically. They must also be prepared to fulfill their roles in the larger social order. Quote 10. He is the man of our whims. The man of nature is differently constituted. Rousseau contrasts the individual molded by societal expectations and whims with the natural man, who is shaped by an alignment with nature. He criticizes how society's artificial demands distort a child's nature, leading to an individual who lacks true harmony with himself. The man of nature is portrayed as someone in touch with his genuine inclinations, free from the pressures and distortions imposed by social conventions. These extracted quotes and explanations provide a view into Rousseau's philosophy on education, emphasizing natural development, the pivotal role of parents, and the holistic nurturing of human potential beyond mere physical growth. Let me know if you need further analysis or have specific sections you'd like to explore more deeply. Quote 11. It would be necessary that the governor had been raised for his pupil, that the pupil's domestics had been raised for their master, that all those who have contact with him had received the impressions that they ought to communicate to him. Rousseau emphasizes the difficulty of creating an effective educational environment, suggesting that in order for a child to be properly educated, everyone involved in their upbringing must themselves be well educated and aligned with the child's needs. This requirement reveals the almost impossible nature of cultivating an ideal educational setting, as it relies on an interconnected network of well-prepared individuals, each capable of contributing positively to the child's growth. It implies that the quality of a child's education depends not just on the teacher, but on a whole community of influences. Quote 12. The result of this procedure is that at first I have spoken little of my Emile, because my first educational maxims, although contrary to those which are established, are so evident that it is difficult for any reasonable man to refuse his consent to them. Rousseau argues that his initial educational principles, although different from traditional practices, are based on common sense and should be one with a reasonable mind. He takes a systematic approach to explaining his methods and aims to show how they can be applied practically. This introduction sets the foundation for his educational philosophy, suggesting that it is rooted in observable truths rather than abstract theories. Quote 13. I shall only remark that, contrary to common opinion, a child's governor ought to be young and even as young as a wise man can be. I would want him to be a child himself if it were possible, to be able to become his pupil's companion and attract his confidence by sharing his enjoyments. Rousseau suggests that the person responsible for a child's education should be young enough to relate to the child and to participate in their joys and experiences. This perspective challenges the conventional wisdom that a mature or older tutor is necessarily better suited for guiding a child. Rousseau's idea is that a young governor can establish a bond of friendship with the pupil, which fosters trust and a deeper connection, leading to a more effective education. Quote 14. I do not want others to ruin my work. I want to raise him alone or not get involved. Rousseau insists on complete autonomy over Emile's upbringing to ensure the integrity of his educational methods. He believes that any external interference could compromise the developmental process he envisions for his pupil. By raising Emile alone, Rousseau aims to protect the child from the conflicting influences of society that could undermine his educational philosophy. This highlights the exclusivity and careful control he deems necessary to cultivate a naturally virtuous individual. Quote 15. Temperance and work are the two true doctors of man. Work sharpens his appetite, and temperance prevents him from abusing it. Rousseau underscores the importance of self-restraint and hard work in maintaining health and well-being. He views these qualities as superior to medicine for preserving both physical and moral health. Work not only keeps the body active, but also increases appreciation for the fruits of labor, while temperance ensures balance and prevents indulgence. This idea reflects Rousseau's broader emphasis on simplicity, natural living, and the cultivation of self-discipline as key components of a healthy and virtuous life. Quote 16. Man is, of all the animals, the one who can least live in herds. Men crammed together like sheep would all perish in a very short time. Man's breath is deadly to his kind. This is no less true in the literal sense than the figurative. Rousseau asserts that humans are not meant to live in densely populated environments, as crowding leads to both physical and moral corruption. He claims that close proximity to others intensifies the spread of disease and negative influences. This perspective aligns with his belief that nature provides a healthier and more suitable environment for human development than urban society. Rousseau advocates for dispersal across the land, emphasizing the benefits of rural living for both the body and the soul. Quote 17. I repeat, the education of man begins at his birth. Before speaking, before understanding, he is already learning. Rousseau stresses that education begins from the moment of birth, even before a child is capable of speech or conscious understanding. Early experiences, sensations, and interactions play a crucial role in shaping the individual. By recognizing that learning starts so early, Rousseau underscores the importance of careful attention to a child's environment and influences from the very beginning of life, as these experiences lay the foundation for their future development. These new extracts continue to explore Rousseau's educational philosophy, focusing on the significance of environment, the need for a holistic and controlled upbringing, and the natural, uncorrupted growth of a child. Let me know if you need further quotes or specific insights into these passages. Quote 18. The only habit that a child should be allowed is to contract none. Do not carry him on one arm more than the other. Do not accustom him to give one hand rather than the other, to use one more than the other, to want to eat, sleep, or be active at the same hours, to be unable to remain alone night or day. Rousseau emphasizes that the only habit a child should acquire is the habit of adaptability. He suggests that routines should not be rigidly enforced, such as always carrying a child on the same arm or encouraging them to favor one hand. By avoiding these habitual practices, a child is better prepared for independence and flexibility in their actions. Rousseau wants children to have the freedom to develop naturally, without being bound by habitual limitations imposed by adults. Quote 19. The habit of seeing new objects without being affected by them destroys this fear. Children raised in clean houses where no spiders are tolerated are afraid of spiders, and this fear often stays with them when grown. I have never seen a man, woman, or child afraid of spiders. Rousseau points out that fear is often a result of unfamiliarity. He explains that children who are accustomed to seeing unfamiliar or potentially frightening objects regularly are less likely to develop irrational fears. By allowing children to see and interact with new and sometimes unpleasant things, they learn not to fear them. Rousseau contrasts children raised in clean environments, where spiders are meticulously removed, with rural children who grow up familiar with such creatures and do not develop an irrational fear of them. Quote 20. The first tears of children are prayers. If one is not careful, they soon become orders. Children begin by getting themselves assisted. They end by getting themselves served. Rousseau warns against responding too readily to a child's cries, as this can lead to an attitude of entitlement. Initially, a child cries to express discomfort or a need, but if this behavior is rewarded without discernment, it transforms into a command rather than a plea. Children will begin to expect to be served whenever they cry, leading to a false sense of authority over others. Rousseau encourages parents and caregivers to be mindful of this transformation to avoid fostering a tyrannical disposition in the child. Quote 21. All wickedness comes from weakness. The child is wicked only because he is weak. Make him strong. He will be good. He who could do everything would never do harm. Rousseau suggests that wickedness arises from a sense of weakness. A child, who is naturally weak, might act out of anger or frustration due to their inability to meet their own needs or achieve their desires. Rousseau argues that if a child is made strong and capable, they are less likely to exhibit wicked behavior, as the desire to harm often comes from an inability to control one's circumstances. He implies that true strength brings about benevolence, as those who are truly powerful do not need to assert their strength by harming others. Quote 22. The spirit of these rules is to accord children more true freedom and less dominion, to let them do more by themselves and to exact less from others. Thus, accustomed early to limiting their desires to their strength, they will feel little the privation of what is not going to be in their power. Rousseau lays out his guiding principles for raising children, emphasizing the importance of fostering independence rather than control. He believes children should be encouraged to do things for themselves and not be given undue authority over others. By limiting their desires to what they can achieve on their own, children learn to be content with their own capabilities, reducing feelings of frustration and entitlement. Rousseau's approach is about preparing children to understand and accept their limitations while maximizing their autonomy. Quote 23. All the little defects of language that one is so afraid of letting children contract are nothing. They can be prevented or corrected with the greatest ease. But those that one causes children to contract by making their speech dull, obscure, and timid, by incessantly criticizing their tone, by picking all their words to pieces, are never corrected. Rousseau argues that minor flaws in a child's speech are not significant and can be easily addressed over time. However, the damage caused by excessive criticism, making a child overly cautious, timid, or insecure in their communication, is much harder to correct. Rousseau believes that a child should be encouraged to express themselves freely without the constant interference of correction, which stifles their confidence and natural expressiveness. Encouraging natural speech, rather than constantly pointing out errors, is key to developing a confident and articulate individual. Quote 24. As soon as Emile has once said, "It hurts," very intense pains indeed will be needed to force him to cry. Rousseau explains that once a child is capable of articulating their pain verbally, they are less likely to cry unless the pain is overwhelming. He believes that children learn to express discomfort in more mature ways when their cries are not met with overreactions. By teaching children that their verbal expression of pain is enough, Rousseau aims to cultivate resilience and a sense of control over their emotions, reducing the need for dramatic displays to seek attention or comfort. Quote 25. To suffer is the first thing he ought to learn, and the thing he will most need to know. Rousseau asserts that experiencing pain is an essential part of a child's education. He believes that learning to endure discomfort without excessive fear or overreaction is crucial for personal growth and resilience. Pain is an unavoidable part of life, and by allowing a child to face small hardships, they are better prepared to handle more significant challenges in the future. This approach fosters emotional strength and independence. Quote 26. What, then, must be thought of that barbarous education which sacrifices the present to an uncertain future, which burdens a child with chains of every sort, and begins by making him miserable in order to prepare him from afar? For I know not what pretended happiness, which it is to be believed he will never enjoy. Rousseau criticizes traditional methods of education that impose strict discipline and make children suffer in the present for the sake of some hypothetical future benefit. He believes that this approach not only deprives children of the joys of their early years, but also overlooks the unpredictability of life. Instead of making children miserable with the hope that it will somehow lead to a better future, Rousseau advocates for allowing them to enjoy the present while naturally preparing them for adulthood. Quote 27. Love childhood. Promote its games, its pleasures, its amiable instinct. Who among you has not sometimes regretted that age when a laugh is always on the lips and the soul is always at peace? Rousseau encourages adults to cherish and nurture childhood, emphasizing the importance of allowing children to experience joy, play, and the innocence of their early years. He reminds adults of their own nostalgic memories of carefree childhood, highlighting the natural happiness that comes with this stage of life. Rousseau's philosophy centers around the belief that children should be allowed to enjoy their present state, as it forms an essential foundation for their overall development. Quote 28. Our unhappiness consists, therefore, in the disproportion between our desires and our faculties. A being endowed with senses whose faculties equaled his desires would be an absolutely happy being. Rousseau argues that unhappiness stems from the imbalance between what we desire and what we are capable of achieving. He suggests that true happiness lies in aligning one's desires with one's abilities, thus reducing frustration and dissatisfaction. A person who only desires what they can realistically attain is more likely to find contentment, while those whose desires exceed their abilities are doomed to perpetual unhappiness. Rousseau's perspective emphasizes the importance of moderation and self-awareness. Quote 29. The truly free man wants only what he can do and does what he pleases. That is my fundamental maxim. It need only be applied to childhood for all the rules of education to flow from it. Rousseau's core belief is that true freedom comes from desiring only what one can realistically achieve and acting accordingly. He believes this principle should be applied to children's education, allowing them to experience autonomy within their capabilities. By encouraging children to understand their limits and find satisfaction within them, Rousseau aims to cultivate a sense of freedom that is genuine and unburdened by unrealistic expectations. This approach fosters independence and resilience, forming the basis of his educational philosophy. Quote 30. The first education ought to be purely negative. It consists not at all in teaching virtue or truth, but in securing the heart from vice and the mind from error. Rousseau argues that early childhood education should not be focused on teaching specific virtues or intellectual lessons, but rather on preventing children from developing bad habits or misconceptions. He believes that children should be allowed to grow without being burdened by premature moral or intellectual teachings. By keeping their hearts free from vice and minds from error, they will be ready to learn and reason effectively when the appropriate time comes, without the hindrances of earlier, misguided influences. Quote 31. Dare I expose the greatest, the most important, the most useful rule of all education? It is not to gain time, but to lose it. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of patience in education. He believes that instead of trying to rush the development of a child, educators should take their time and let the child mature at their own pace. By not hurrying the process, educators allow the child's faculties to develop naturally, ensuring a strong foundation for future learning. Rousseau values this slower approach as it prevents the premature teaching of abstract concepts that the child is not yet ready to understand, which can lead to confusion and errors. Quote 32. The sole passion natural to man is amour de soi, or amour propre, taken in an extended sense. This amour propre in itself, or relative to us, is good and useful, and since it has no necessary relation to others, it is in this respect naturally neutral. Rousseau suggests that the only natural passion within humans is self-love, or amour de soi, which, when viewed broadly, is a positive and beneficial force. This self-love is centered on the individual's instinct for self-preservation and well-being, and in itself, it is neither good nor bad. It becomes harmful only when it is misdirected or influenced by external pressures and comparisons with others. For Rousseau, maintaining this pure, neutral form of self-love during childhood is crucial, as it can be the basis for a balanced, virtuous adult life. Quote 33. The first sentiment of justice does not come to us from the justice we owe, but from that which is owed us. And it is again one of the mistakes of ordinary educations that, speaking at first to children of their duties, never of their rights, one begins by telling them the opposite of what is necessary, what they cannot understand, and what cannot interest them. Rousseau argues that children naturally develop a sense of justice based on what is owed to them rather than on the duties they owe to others. Traditional education systems, which often focus on teaching children about their responsibilities and duties, miss the mark because children cannot yet understand or be interested in such abstract concepts. Rousseau believes that by starting with what is immediately relevant to children, their rights and the fairness they experience firsthand, they can develop a deeper understanding of justice that will eventually extend to others. Quote 34. It is important that none of a child's naive statements, the products of the simplicity of the ideas on which he feeds, ever be picked up in his presence, or quoted in such a way that he can learn of it. An indiscreet outburst of laughter can ruin the work of 6 months, and do irreparable harm for the whole of life. Rousseau warns against ridiculing or drawing attention to a child's innocent remarks, as such actions can have lasting negative effects. He believes that children, in their early stages of intellectual development, are highly sensitive, and an ill-timed laugh can lead to embarrassment or self-consciousness, which may discourage them from exploring their thoughts freely in the future. The child's confidence in expressing themselves can be deeply undermined by such mockery, which in turn could hinder their natural intellectual and emotional growth. Quote 35. The only lesson of morality appropriate to childhood, and the most important for every age, is never to harm anyone. Rousseau asserts that the fundamental moral lesson suitable for young children, and indeed for people of all ages, is simply not to harm others. He believes that complex moral teachings are inappropriate for young minds, but teaching them to avoid causing harm provides a solid foundation for moral behavior. By focusing on this negative rule, what not to do, Rousseau argues that children can be guided toward a naturally virtuous way of living without being overwhelmed by abstract ethical principles. Quote 36. Respect childhood, and do not hurry to judge it, either for good or for ill. Let the exceptional children show themselves, be proved, and be confirmed for a long time before adopting special methods for them. Leave nature to act for a long time before you get involved with acting in its place, lest you impede its operations. Rousseau encourages patience when it comes to judging children, stressing that one should neither praise nor criticize too hastily. He advises that children should be given the time and space to develop naturally without undue interference. By allowing nature to take its course, educators avoid disrupting the child's organic growth. Rousseau suggests that acting prematurely can hinder rather than help, and that the best approach is often to observe patiently, allowing the child's unique qualities to emerge naturally over time. Quote 37. Apparent facility at learning is the cause of children's ruin. It is not seen that this very facility is the proof they learn nothing. Their brain, smooth and polished, returns like a mirror the objects presented to it. But nothing remains, nothing penetrates. The child retains the words. The ideas are reflected off of him. Rousseau criticizes the notion that a child's ability to quickly memorize and recite information is a sign of effective learning. He argues that this ease is misleading because it shows that nothing meaningful is truly understood or internalized. The child may remember words and repeat them, but lacks a deeper understanding. Like a mirror that reflects an image without keeping it, the child retains superficial knowledge that fades away without lasting comprehension. Rousseau urges educators to look beyond the mere appearance of learning and focus on fostering genuine understanding. Quote 38. In any study whatsoever, unless one has the ideas of the things represented, the representative signs are nothing. However, one always limits the child to these signs without ever being able to make him understand any of the things which they represent. Rousseau asserts that without understanding the underlying concepts, the symbols or terms children learn are meaningless. He criticizes the traditional approach to education, which often focuses on teaching children words or symbols without helping them grasp the associated ideas. This superficial learning results in children who may know how to recite facts or vocabulary but have no true comprehension of what these represent. Rousseau stresses that meaningful education should involve connecting words to ideas, ensuring that the child truly understands what they are learning. Quote 39. Take an opposite route with your pupil. Let him always believe he is the master, and let it always be you who are. There is no subjection so perfect as that which keeps the appearance of freedom. Thus, the will itself is made captive. Rousseau suggests that the most effective form of guidance is one in which the child feels that they are in control, while in reality, the educator is subtly guiding their actions. By allowing the child the illusion of autonomy, the educator can influence the child's choices without imposing overt authority. This approach ensures that the child willingly follows the desired path without feeling coerced or rebellious. The key is to make the child think they are making their own decisions, while their will is actually being shaped and guided by the educator. Quote 40. It is a most pitiable error to imagine that the exercise of the body is harmful to the operations of the mind, as if these two activities ought not to move together in harmony, and that the one ought not always to direct the other. Rousseau argues against the belief that physical exercise is detrimental to intellectual development. He emphasizes that the body and mind should develop together in harmony, with physical activity complementing and enhancing mental growth. According to Rousseau, both faculties, physical and intellectual, should work in unison, as the strength of one supports the other. He criticizes the conventional separation of intellectual and physical education, advocating instead for a more holistic approach that nurtures the whole person. Quote 41. Exercise his body continually. Make him robust and healthy in order to make him wise and reasonable. Let him work, be active, run, yell, always be in motion. Let him be a man in his vigor, and soon he will be one in his reason. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of physical activity for a child's overall development. He believes that a strong, healthy body is foundational to developing wisdom and reason. By encouraging children to engage in physical activities, running, working, playing, they become physically vigorous, which in turn supports their intellectual and emotional growth. Rousseau sees the cultivation of physical strength as a prerequisite for developing sound reasoning abilities, reinforcing the interconnectedness of body and mind. Quote 42. Treat him, then, according to his age, in spite of the appearances, and be afraid of exhausting his strength for having wanted to exercise it too much. If this young brain warms up, if you see it beginning to boil, let it ferment freely at first, but never stimulate it lest it expend itself. Rousseau advises against pushing children too hard intellectually. He warns that the appearance of genius or brilliance in a child can often mislead adults into overworking them, which ultimately exhausts their mental strength. Instead, he suggests letting the child's mind develop at its own pace. When a child's thoughts show early signs of activity, it is crucial to allow them to unfold naturally rather than intensifying the intellectual exercise, which could burn out their potential. The emphasis is on patience, allowing natural curiosity to flourish without pressure. Quote 43. From giddy children come vulgar men. I know of no observation more universal and more certain than this one. Rousseau asserts that children who are overly excitable and not properly guided in their early years tend to grow into crude or vulgar adults. He sees this as a nearly inevitable outcome, suggesting that the lack of proper restraint and discipline in childhood leads to a failure to develop refined behavior and sound judgment in adulthood. Rousseau believes that the early character of a child significantly shapes their future personality, and failing to instill calmness and thoughtfulness results in a lack of sophistication later in life. Quote 44. Respect childhood, and do not hurry to judge it, either for good or for ill. Let the exceptional children show themselves, be proved, and be confirmed for a long time before adopting special methods for them. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of respecting the natural pace of childhood development without rushing to conclusions about a child's abilities. He advises against labeling children as prodigies or dismissing them as lacking talent too early. Instead, exceptional abilities, if present, will reveal themselves in time and should be allowed to do so gradually. This respect for the natural growth of a child ensures that they are not pushed into specialized or advanced education before they are ready, allowing a more balanced and stable development. Quote 45. The limbs of a growing body ought all to have room in their garments. Nothing ought to hinder either their movement or their growth. Nothing too tight. Nothing which clings to the body. No belts. Rousseau stresses the importance of physical freedom for children during their growth. He believes that clothing should not restrict the natural movement and development of the body. Tight or constricting garments can hinder both comfort and physical growth, potentially causing harm. He recommends loose, comfortable clothing that allows for unrestricted movement, promoting healthy physical development. This reflects his broader philosophy that both body and mind should be allowed to grow naturally without unnecessary constraints. Quote 46. The more he gets used to the sufferings which can strike him, the more, as Montaigne would say, the sting of strangeness is taken from them, and also the more his soul is made invulnerable and hard. Rousseau argues that exposing children to manageable levels of discomfort and hardship helps them build resilience. By gradually experiencing and becoming accustomed to the minor pains and challenges of life, children learn not to fear suffering. This gradual exposure hardens their character, making them better equipped to face greater adversities in the future. Rousseau draws on Montaigne's wisdom, suggesting that familiarity with discomfort removes its power to distress, thereby fortifying the soul against life's inevitable difficulties. Quote 47. In the kind of cold, I mean, he will cool off sufficiently in getting there to drink it without danger. Above all, take these precautions without his noticing them. I would rather that he be sick sometimes than constantly attentive to his health. Rousseau highlights the importance of not overprotecting children to the point that they become overly concerned with their own health. He prefers that children sometimes fall ill naturally, rather than grow up obsessing over health precautions. Rousseau's approach advocates for balance, taking necessary steps to prevent harm, but doing so subtly, so the child does not become anxious or fixated on their health. His goal is to raise children who are hardy, able to endure discomfort, and unafraid of the natural risks that come with physical activity and exploration. Quote 48. What I have said about the two senses, whose use is the most continuous and the most important, can serve to exemplify the way of exercising the others. Sight and touch are applied equally to bodies at rest, and moving bodies. But since it is only disturbance of the air which can arouse the sense of hearing, it is only a body in motion which makes noise or sound, and if everything were at rest, we would never hear anything. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of exercising all the senses in a balanced manner. He explains that while sight and touch are used to perceive both stationary and moving objects, hearing is unique in that it only becomes active when there is movement, as sound arises from disturbances in the air. If everything were perfectly still, there would be nothing to hear. Therefore, he implies that understanding and training our senses require us to recognize their distinct roles in perceiving the world around us. By providing this context, Rousseau advocates for a holistic approach to sensory education, encouraging the development of all senses to achieve a fuller perception of the environment. Quote 49. Teach him to speak plainly and clearly, to articulate well, to pronounce exactly and without affectation, to know and follow grammatical accent and prosody, always to employ enough voice to be heard, but never to employ more than is required, a defect common in children raised in colleges. In all things, nothing superfluous. Rousseau advises that children should be taught to communicate in a straightforward and natural manner. He stresses the importance of proper articulation, accurate pronunciation, and appropriate volume. The goal is for the child to be understood clearly without unnecessary exaggeration or effort. Rousseau criticizes the tendency of children raised in formal institutions to overuse their voices, implying that their education often emphasizes showiness over effective communication. He advocates for moderation and simplicity in all forms of expression, reflecting his belief that natural and genuine abilities are preferable to artificial displays of skill. Quote 50. I want him to have no other master than nature, and no other model than objects. I want him to have before his eyes the original itself, and not the paper representing it. To sketch a house from a house, a tree from a tree, a man from a man, so that he gets accustomed to observing bodies and their appearances well, and not to taking false and conventional imitations for true imitations. Rousseau emphasizes that children should learn by observing and imitating real objects, rather than copying from pre-made drawings. He believes that direct engagement with nature helps children develop accurate observational skills, allowing them to understand true proportions and forms. By drawing directly from life, a child gains a better appreciation of the natural world and avoids internalizing the distortions that often come from copying other people's representations. Rousseau's approach is intended to cultivate a deeper understanding of the physical world, prioritizing first-hand experience over abstract learning. Quote 51. I will seek the relations, and he will find them, for I will seek them in such a way as to make him find them. His approach to teaching by emphasizing the importance of guiding a child to make discoveries independently. Rather than providing direct answers, the teacher creates situations that allow the child to explore and uncover relationships on their own. This method encourages active learning and critical thinking, as the child becomes an active participant in their education rather than a passive recipient of information. Rousseau's approach aims to foster curiosity and problem-solving skills, empowering the child to engage deeply with the material. Quote 52. The education of children is a vocation in which one must know how to lose time in order to gain it. Rousseau highlights the importance of patience in educating children, noting that sometimes progress requires taking time that may seem unproductive. He believes that forcing learning or rushing through developmental stages can ultimately be counterproductive. Instead, educators should allow children the time they need to explore and understand at their own pace. This approach ultimately results in deeper, more meaningful learning, as the child is given the opportunity to absorb and engage with each lesson fully. Rousseau's philosophy underscores the idea that true education is not about speed, but about the quality and depth of understanding. Quote 53. In all our dabblings, we shall not stop spying on nature. We shall never do anything except under the master's eye. Rousseau insists that all learning activities should be guided by careful observation of nature. He believes that nature itself is the best teacher, and every educational endeavor should involve direct engagement with the natural world. Whether it is drawing, crafting, or any other activity, Rousseau wants these exercises to be grounded in the real, observable world. This insistence on staying close to nature ensures that the child's understanding remains rooted in reality, preventing them from being misled by abstract or theoretical representations that may distort their perception. Quote 54. The most suitable means for governing children is to lead them by their mouths. The motive of gluttony is in particular preferable to that of vanity, in that the former is an appetite of nature, immediately dependent on sense, while the latter is a work of opinion subject to the caprice of men and to all sorts of abuses. Rousseau argues that it is easier and more effective to guide children using their natural inclinations, such as their desire for food, rather than using more abstract motivations like vanity. He believes that gluttony is a basic instinct closely linked to physical needs, making it a straightforward way to motivate children. In contrast, vanity is based on societal opinion and is susceptible to corruption and abuse. By using a natural and simple approach like the satisfaction of appetite, educators can encourage positive behavior in a way that is less likely to foster negative traits, such as competitiveness or the pursuit of external approval. Quote 55. The simpler our tastes, the more universal they are. The most common repugnances are to composite dishes. Has anyone ever been seen to have a disgust for water or bread? Rousseau emphasizes the value of keeping children's tastes simple, suggesting that the most basic and unadulterated foods are those that are most universally acceptable. He points out that no one is naturally repulsed by essential foods like water or bread, implying that these simple tastes align with our natural state. By maintaining this simplicity in a child's diet, Rousseau believes they can adapt more easily to different environments and circumstances. Cultivating basic, natural tastes prevents children from developing the kind of exclusive preferences that could limit their adaptability and increase dependence on unnecessary luxuries. Quote 56. One of the proofs that the taste for meat is not natural to man is the indifference that children have for that kind of food, and the preference they all give to vegetable foods, such as dairy products, pastry, fruits, etc. Rousseau argues that humans are not naturally inclined to eat meat, and he uses children's preference for fruits, dairy, and other plant-based foods as evidence. He believes that children's natural tastes are an indicator of what humans were originally meant to eat before societal habits altered these preferences. Rousseau connects the consumption of meat with cruelty, suggesting that a vegetarian diet is more in tune with human nature and promotes gentler character traits. By preserving a child's natural dietary inclinations, Rousseau believes it is possible to cultivate a more humane and less aggressive disposition. Quote 57. Do you now want to judge him by comparisons? Let him mix with other children and do as he pleases. You will soon see which is the most truly formed, which best approaches the perfection of his age. Rousseau encourages assessing a child's development by allowing them to interact freely with their peers. He believes that this natural interaction reveals a child's true character and abilities, showing who has been most properly formed according to nature. The child who stands out will be the one who embodies the fullest potential of their age without the artificial influence of rigid instruction. Rousseau emphasizes that true education results in children who are naturally confident, capable, and independent, without needing to rely on imposed authority or external validation. Quote 58. He has come to the maturity of childhood. He has lived a child's life. He has not purchased his perfection at the expense of his happiness. On the contrary, they have cooperated with each other. Rousseau describes his ideal of a well-raised child who has achieved the appropriate level of development for their age without sacrificing happiness. He rejects the idea of forcing children into maturity through rigorous or premature instruction, arguing instead that natural growth should lead to both happiness and development. By allowing children to live freely according to their age, their intellectual and physical growth occurs alongside their joy in life, resulting in a well-rounded, mature child who has enjoyed their childhood fully. Quote 59. If we are reduced to considering him as he is, or to supposing what he will be in his old age, the idea of nature declining effaces all our pleasure. There is none in seeing a man advance with great steps toward his grave, and the image of death makes everything ugly. Rousseau reflects on the difference between contemplating childhood and adulthood. He finds that childhood, with its potential and vitality, is inherently beautiful, whereas adulthood is often marked by a decline that leads inevitably toward death. This perception makes the contemplation of adult life less pleasant. Childhood, by contrast, represents growth, possibility, and the promise of the future. Rousseau uses this contrast to argue for the value of letting children fully experience and enjoy their formative years, as this phase embodies a kind of beauty and hope that adulthood does not. Quote 60. From where does man's weakness come? From the inequality between his strength and his desires. It is our passions that make us weak, because to satisfy them we would need more strength than nature gives us. Therefore, diminish desires, and you will increase strength. Rousseau explains that human weakness is not inherently physical, but arises from the discrepancy between our desires and our abilities to fulfill them. It is our passions that create this imbalance, making us feel weak and vulnerable when our aspirations exceed our natural strength. The solution Rousseau offers is to minimize desires, which in turn increases one's power, as strength is effectively defined by the gap between what one wants and what one can achieve. By teaching children to moderate their desires, Rousseau aims to create individuals who are not weighed down by excessive or unrealistic needs, thereby enhancing their ability to function effectively and independently. Quote 61. Make your pupil attentive to the phenomena of nature. Soon you will make him curious. But to feed his curiosity, never hurry to satisfy it. Put the questions within his reach and leave them to him to resolve. Rousseau advises educators to nurture a child's natural curiosity by drawing their attention to observable phenomena without immediately providing answers. He believes that creating an environment where children are encouraged to think and ask questions without receiving instant solutions fosters deeper intellectual engagement. The process of discovery, where the child is given the opportunity to solve problems on their own, is essential for genuine learning. By guiding rather than dictating, Rousseau suggests that a child's curiosity becomes the driving force for their education, leading to a more meaningful and personal understanding of the world. Quote 62. No book other than the world, no instruction other than the facts. The child who reads does not think, he only reads. He is not informing himself, he learns words. Rousseau argues against relying solely on books for education, suggesting that the natural world and direct observation provide more valuable learning experiences. He believes that reading, especially at a young age, leads to a superficial acquisition of knowledge where the child merely learns words without understanding their real meaning or context. Instead, Rousseau advocates for an education based on direct engagement with the world, where the child learns from actual experiences and phenomena. This approach, he argues, allows children to develop true understanding, rather than simply memorizing abstract concepts from books. Quote 63. There is a chain of general truths by which all the sciences are connected with common principles, out of which they develop successively. This chain is the method of philosophers. We are not dealing with it here. There is another entirely different chain by which each particular object attracts another, and always shows the one that follows. This order, which fosters by means of constant curiosity the attention that they all demand, is the one most men follow and, in particular, is the one required for children. Rousseau distinguishes between two methods of learning: the philosophical method, which connects scientific truths through abstract principles, and a more intuitive, curiosity-driven method that links one observable phenomenon to another. He believes the latter is more suitable for children, as it aligns with their natural way of learning through curiosity and exploration. By allowing children to discover relationships between individual objects and experiences, this method fosters an organic and engaging learning process. Rousseau suggests that education should follow the child's natural inclination to explore, creating a chain of learning based on their interests rather than imposing complex, abstract connections that are difficult for them to grasp. Quote 64. The issue is not to teach him the sciences, but to give him the taste for loving them and methods for learning them when this taste is better developed. This is very certainly a fundamental principle of every good education. Rousseau emphasizes that the primary goal of education should not be to fill a child's mind with scientific facts, but to cultivate a genuine interest in learning and provide them with the tools to continue learning independently. He believes that fostering curiosity and a love for discovery is more important than achieving immediate mastery of specific subjects. By giving children the methods and motivation to learn, Rousseau aims to create lifelong learners who can pursue knowledge on their own terms as they grow older. This approach encourages children to view learning as a rewarding and self-directed activity rather than as a set of imposed obligations. Quote 65. I do not like explanations in speeches. Young people pay little attention to them and hardly retain them. Things. I shall never repeat enough that we attribute too much power to words. With our babbling education, we produce only babblers. Rousseau argues against using lengthy verbal explanations when educating children, as he believes they are ineffective. Young learners struggle to pay attention and retain abstract concepts when conveyed solely through words. Instead, Rousseau emphasizes the importance of learning through direct experience and interaction with tangible things. By focusing on practical demonstrations rather than speeches, children can better understand and internalize lessons. Rousseau criticizes traditional education for relying too much on words, which he sees as leading to superficial learning and producing individuals who can only repeat what they have heard rather than truly understanding it. Quote 66. Let him not learn science, but discover it. If ever you substitute in his mind authority for reason, he will no longer reason. He will be nothing more than the plaything of others' opinion. Rousseau emphasizes that children should be encouraged to discover knowledge independently rather than passively absorbing it from authority figures. He believes that the true purpose of education is to cultivate reasoning skills, allowing children to explore and understand the world through their own inquiries. If a child learns simply by accepting what is taught without questioning, they become susceptible to manipulation and unable to think for themselves. Rousseau's approach to education prioritizes experiential learning and reasoning, fostering the development of independent thinkers who are less likely to be swayed by external influences. Quote 67. If we could find its position without seeing it, did we not say that the forest was north of Montmorency? Consequently, Montmorency ought to be south of the forest. In this dialogue, Rousseau demonstrates how practical experience can be used to teach abstract concepts like navigation. In the scenario where Emile and his tutor are lost, Emile learns to use his memory and the natural indicators of direction to find his way back. By recalling a previous observation about the forest's position relative to Montmorency and applying that knowledge practically, Emile learns the value of geographical orientation. Rousseau uses this example to illustrate that lessons are more effective when learned through necessity and practical problem-solving rather than through theoretical explanations alone. Quote 68. You have grown so many inches. That is the ditch you jumped over, the load you carried, the distance you threw a pebble, the course you ran before getting winded, etc. Let us now see what you will do. Thus I arouse him without making him jealous of anyone. He will want to outdo himself. He ought to. I see no problem in his being his own competitor. Rousseau stresses the importance of encouraging self-improvement without fostering jealousy or competition with others. Instead of comparing a child's achievements with those of their peers, he suggests using their past accomplishments as the benchmark. By focusing on personal growth, the child is motivated to surpass their previous abilities, rather than being driven by rivalry or comparison. This method fosters a positive form of competition, where the child strives to become better without falling into the traps of envy or inferiority. Rousseau's approach emphasizes the value of internal motivation and self-directed progress. Quote 69. I hate books. They only teach one to talk about what one does not know. It is said that Hermes engraved the elements of the sciences on columns in order to shelter his discoveries from a flood. If he had left a good imprint of them in man's head, they would have been preserved by tradition. Rousseau expresses his disdain for relying solely on books for education, arguing that they often lead to superficial knowledge without true understanding. He refers to the legend of Hermes engraving scientific knowledge on columns to preserve it, suggesting that real knowledge should be internalized and passed down through human experience rather than merely recorded in books. For Rousseau, genuine education comes from engaging with the world directly rather than memorizing information from texts. He believes that books often promote shallow learning, where individuals can speak about subjects without truly comprehending them. Quote 70. Robinson Crusoe on his island, alone, deprived of the assistance of his kind and the instruments of all the arts, providing nevertheless for his subsistence, for his preservation, and even procuring for himself a kind of well-being. This is an object interesting for every age, and one which can be made agreeable to children in countless ways. Rousseau praises the story of Robinson Crusoe as an ideal educational tool because it portrays a man who must rely on himself and his resourcefulness to survive. By placing himself in Robinson's position, the child can learn to think practically, solve problems, and understand the value of independence. Rousseau believes that the story captures the essence of natural education, as it emphasizes the importance of using one's own abilities to overcome challenges and meet basic needs. By identifying with Robinson Crusoe, the child learns to appreciate the significance of practical skills and self-reliance, making it an effective foundation for further education. Quote 71. Now, of all the occupations which can provide subsistence to man, that which brings him closest to the state of nature is manual labor. Of all conditions, the artisan's is the most independent of fortune and men. The artisan depends only on his work. He is as free as the farmer is slave. Rousseau argues that manual labor is the occupation that aligns most closely with the natural state of humanity. He praises the artisan's independence, emphasizing that their reliance on their own skills and labor makes them less dependent on others or external conditions. Unlike the farmer, whose livelihood depends on the whims of nature or the power of others, the artisan has the freedom to take his tools and work wherever he chooses. Rousseau values this independence, seeing it as a way to maintain personal freedom and dignity, as the artisan's survival depends solely on his own abilities rather than external circumstances. Quote 72. The letter kills, and the spirit enlivens. The goal is less to learn a trade in order to know a trade than to conquer the prejudice that despise a trade. Rousseau stresses the importance of instilling respect for manual labor rather than merely acquiring a trade skill. He believes that the true value of learning a trade lies in overcoming societal prejudices that deem manual labor inferior. By learning a trade, one gains more than a skill. One gains freedom from the disdainful attitudes that society attaches to physical work. Rousseau's point is that understanding the true dignity of labor is far more valuable than simply acquiring technical expertise. He encourages embracing the spirit of work as a way to become independent of fortune and societal judgments. Quote 73. Remember that it is not a talent that I ask of you. It is a trade, a true trade, a purely mechanical art in which the hands work more than the head, one which does not lead to fortune, but enables one to do without it. Rousseau distinguishes between cultivating a talent and learning a trade. He emphasizes that he wants Emile to learn a practical skill, a mechanical art that relies more on the hands than the intellect. Such a trade may not lead to wealth, but it provides a means of independence and self-sufficiency, allowing one to live without depending on fortune. Rousseau values the trade not for its potential financial rewards, but for its role in helping Emile remain free and independent, unburdened by the uncertainty and social standing. Quote 74. Of what importance is it to me is the phrase most familiar to the ignorant man and most suitable for the wise one. Rousseau suggests that ignorance and wisdom share a common attitude, the ability to disregard things that do not directly impact one's life. He argues that true wisdom lies in recognizing what is and is not important, avoiding unnecessary entanglement in matters that do not concern one's well-being. This perspective allows both the ignorant and the wise to focus on what truly matters, without being distracted by irrelevant concerns. By teaching Emile to discern what genuinely matters to him, Rousseau aims to cultivate a sense of focus and simplicity, essential traits for both wisdom and happiness. Quote 75. Amidst so many new relations on which he is going to depend, he will, in spite of himself, have to judge. Let us teach him, therefore, to judge well. Rousseau acknowledges that as Emile grows, he will inevitably be forced to make judgments about the world and the people around him. Since these judgments are unavoidable, Rousseau emphasizes the importance of teaching Emile how to judge accurately and fairly. This education in judgment is crucial because, as Emile interacts with society, sound assessments will determine how effectively he navigates complex social relationships. Rousseau wants Emile to develop discernment and the ability to critically evaluate situations, ensuring that he is not misled by appearances or influenced by popular opinion. Emile, quote 76. Emile has little knowledge, but what he has is truly his own. He knows nothing halfway. Among the small number of things he knows and knows well, the most important is that there are many things of which he is ignorant and which he can know one day. There are many more that other men know that he will never know in his life, and there are an infinite number of others that no man will ever know. Rousseau points out that Emile's education prioritizes depth over breadth. Emile may not know a great many things, but the knowledge he possesses is fully understood and internalized. He values quality over quantity, ensuring that Emile understands each concept thoroughly before moving on. Moreover, Emile is aware of the limits of his knowledge and accepts that there are things he may never learn, as well as mysteries that no human will ever solve. This understanding of his own ignorance fosters humility and a realistic perspective on learning, distinguishing Emile's education from that of others who may accumulate superficial knowledge without true comprehension. Quote 77. Our passions are the principal instruments of our preservation. It is, therefore, an enterprise as vain as it is ridiculous to want to destroy them. It is to control nature. It is to reform the work of God. Rousseau asserts that passions are inherent to human nature and play a crucial role in our survival and well-being. He argues that attempting to eliminate or suppress passions is both impractical and misguided, as they are fundamental to who we are as human beings. Rather than trying to eradicate passions, Rousseau believes we should learn to manage and direct them constructively. He views passions as a natural part of our existence, given by nature or God, and they should be understood and used to enhance our lives, rather than being treated as something negative that must be eliminated. Quote 78. One wants to obtain the preference that one grants. Love must be reciprocal. To be loved, one has to make oneself lovable. To be preferred, one has to make oneself more lovable than another, more lovable than every other, at least in the eyes of the beloved object. Rousseau explains that love is inherently reciprocal. It involves a mutual exchange of affection. For love to be genuine, both parties must be willing to put in the effort to make themselves lovable. This need for reciprocity also creates the desire to be preferred over others, leading individuals to strive to be more attractive, admirable, or desirable to the one they love. Rousseau presents love as an active process that requires both individuals to contribute, highlighting the importance of personal growth and self-improvement in romantic relationships to ensure they remain meaningful and fulfilling. Quote 79. It is man's weakness which makes him sociable. It is our common misery to humanity. We would owe humanity nothing if we were not men. Rousseau argues that human sociability arises from our inherent weaknesses and shared vulnerabilities. It is our collective suffering and limitations that lead us to form social bonds, as these connections provide mutual support and alleviate our hardships. Without our weaknesses, we would not feel the need to connect with others, and therefore there would be no sense of humanity or compassion. Rousseau suggests that our interdependence, born from the recognition of our shared struggles, is what forms the basis of human relationships and fosters empathy, ultimately giving rise to the concept of humanity. Quote 80. We are, so to speak, born twice, once to exist and once to live, once for our species and once for our sex. Rousseau explains that human development involves two significant stages. The first is physical birth, when a person enters the world and exists biologically, and the second is when an individual matures and becomes aware of their role in society, including the awakening of sexual identity. This second birth marks the moment when a person truly begins to engage with life on a social and emotional level. For Rousseau, this maturation is a transformative process that brings the individual fully into their humanity, experiencing passions, relationships, and a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Quote 81. The source of our passions, the origin and the principle of all the others, the only one born with man, and which never leaves him so long as he lives, is self-love, a primitive, innate passion, which is anterior to every other, and of which all others are in a sense only modifications. Rousseau identifies self-love, or amour de soi, as the fundamental passion from which all other passions arise. It is an innate instinct that drives individuals to care for themselves and ensure their survival. Self-love is inherently positive and serves as the basis for all other emotions, which are variations of this original passion. Rousseau suggests that while self-love in its pure form is beneficial and aligned with nature, it can be distorted by societal influences, leading to negative emotions like envy and pride. Understanding this foundational passion is crucial to managing the other passions that develop from it. Quote 82. The first sentiment of which a carefully raised young man is capable is not love, it is friendship. The first act of his nascent imagination is to teach him that he has fellows, and the species affects him before the female sex. Rousseau believes that the first significant emotional attachment a young person forms during adolescence is friendship rather than romantic love. As the young person's imagination develops, they begin to recognize their connection to others, realizing that they belong to a community of peers. This awareness fosters the capacity for friendship, which serves as the foundation for more complex emotions, such as love. For Rousseau, friendship is a crucial step in a young person's development, as it cultivates empathy, understanding, and the ability to form meaningful bonds with others before romantic feelings emerge. Physiognomy, quote 83. It does not reveal itself in large features, nor character in great actions. It is in bagatelles that nature comes to light. Rousseau suggests that the true nature of a person is revealed not in grand gestures or dramatic actions, but in the small, seemingly insignificant details of their everyday behavior. He believes that the big actions people take are often too calculated or influenced by external pressures, and therefore may not accurately represent their character. Instead, it is the small, spontaneous moments, the bagatelles, that provide a genuine glimpse into one's true nature. For Rousseau, these little details are more telling of a person's character than any public display, as they are less influenced by the need for conformity or impressing others. Quote 84. Teach your pupil to love all men, even those who despise men. Do things in such a way that he puts himself in no class, but finds his bearings in all. Speak before him of humankind with tenderness, even with pity, but never with contempt. Man, do not dishonor man. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of cultivating love for humanity in Emile, even towards those who hold a negative view of mankind. He encourages the educator to help Emile maintain a sense of belonging to all of humanity, avoiding alignment with any specific social class or group. By fostering an attitude of compassion rather than contempt, Rousseau aims to nurture empathy and understanding in Emile, teaching him to view people with kindness rather than judgment. This approach is intended to instill in Emile a respect for all human beings, regardless of their flaws or shortcomings, and to prevent him from developing a sense of superiority over others. Quote 85. To pity another's misfortune, one doubtless needs to know it, but one does not need to feel it. When one has suffered or fears suffering, one pities those who suffer. But when one is suffering, one pities only oneself. Rousseau explains that pity arises from an understanding of suffering rather than from directly experiencing it. He believes that individuals are capable of feeling compassion for others when they are not personally experiencing pain, as they have the mental space to empathize. However, when someone is in the midst of their own suffering, their focus naturally shifts inward, making it difficult to extend compassion to others. For Rousseau, the ability to pity others is linked to a state of personal well-being, as it requires an emotional surplus that is unavailable when one is consumed by their own hardships. Quote 86. We judge happiness too much on the basis of appearances. We suppose it to be there where it is least present. We seek it where it could not be. Gaiety is only a very equivocal sign. A gay man is often only an unfortunate one who seeks to mislead others and to forget himself. Rousseau argues that people often misjudge where happiness lies, relying too much on outward appearances. He suggests that visible gaiety is not necessarily an indication of true happiness, as many people use humor and cheerfulness as a way to mask their inner pain or distract themselves from their own unhappiness. Rousseau believes that genuine happiness is often quieter and less visible, and that people frequently seek happiness in superficial places where it cannot truly be found. He encourages a deeper understanding of what constitutes happiness, one that goes beyond external displays and looks at the condition of a person's inner life. Quote 87. The restlessness of desire produces curiosity and inconstancy. The emptiness of turbulent pleasure produces boredom. One is never bored with his condition when one knows none more agreeable. Rousseau explains that constant desires lead to a state of restlessness, resulting in curiosity and inconstancy. People who are driven by turbulent pleasures often find themselves ultimately unsatisfied, as the thrill of these pleasures fades quickly, leaving behind a sense of emptiness and boredom. Rousseau believes that true contentment arises when one is not preoccupied with comparing their situation to others. When a person knows only their current state and has no reason to believe there is anything better, they are less likely to be dissatisfied and are more capable of finding fulfillment in their own circumstances. Quote 88. A truly happy man hardly speaks and hardly laughs. He draws, so to speak, the happiness up around his heart. Boisterous games and turbulent joy veil disgust and boredom, but melancholy is the friend of delight. Tenderness and tears accompany the sweetest enjoyments, and excessive joy itself plucks tears rather than laughs. Rousseau describes true happiness as something quiet and inward rather than loud and boisterous. A genuinely happy person does not need to constantly express their joy outwardly. Instead, they feel a deep and calm contentment that surrounds their heart. He contrasts this with the loud, turbulent expressions of joy, which often serve to cover up a sense of dissatisfaction or boredom. For Rousseau, melancholy and tenderness are more closely associated with true happiness than excessive laughter or loud celebrations. The deepest joys are often accompanied by tears rather than laughter, as they touch the soul in a profound and tender way. Quote 89. We are told that conscience is the work of prejudices. Nevertheless, I know by my experience that conscience persists in following the order of nature against all the laws of men. Rousseau argues that conscience is not simply a product of societal conditioning or prejudice, but an innate aspect of human nature that remains true regardless of external laws or expectations. He suggests that conscience is a natural guide that determines what is right and just, independent of the artificial constructs imposed by society. Through personal experience, Rousseau observes that even when human-made laws contradict our natural sense of morality, the voice of conscience remains steadfast. This idea underscores Rousseau's belief in the importance of nurturing natural human instincts rather than forcing conformity to societal norms. Quote 90. Let us refrain from proclaiming the truth to those who are not in a condition to understand it. For to do this is to want to substitute error for truth. It would be better to have no idea of the divinity than to have ideas of it that are base, fantastic, insulting, or unworthy. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of timing and comprehension when introducing complex ideas, such as those about God or divinity, to young minds. He argues that revealing profound truths to those who are not yet capable of understanding them can lead to misconceptions and a distorted perception of these ideas. Rousseau believes that it is better for individuals to remain ignorant of certain concepts until they are ready to understand them properly, rather than holding flawed or demeaning views that could undermine the true essence of the ideas. This perspective reflects Rousseau's broader philosophy of allowing natural development at an appropriate pace. Quote 91. The faith of children and of many men is a question of geography. Are they to be recompensed for being born in Rome rather than in Mecca? Rousseau questions the fairness of religious beliefs being tied to one's place of birth, suggesting that the faith a person adopts is often determined by geography rather than personal conviction. He highlights the arbitrariness of being born into a particular religion and criticizes the notion that salvation or divine reward should depend on factors. For Rousseau, true faith should be a matter of personal understanding and inner conviction, not merely a consequence of the culture or environment in which one is raised. This critique aligns with his belief in the value of reason and individual exploration in matters of spirituality. Quote 92. The forgetting of all religion leads to the forgetting of the duties of man. Rousseau believes that a lack of religious faith can lead to a disregard for moral responsibilities and duties. He argues that religion serves as a foundation for ethical behavior, providing a sense of accountability and guiding individuals toward virtuous actions. When people abandon religion entirely, they risk losing the moral compass that helps them distinguish right from wrong. For Rousseau, religion is not just a set of beliefs, but a vital influence that shapes human conduct and ensures adherence to the principles of justice and compassion. Quote 93. To protect the unfortunate young fellow from this moral death to which he was so near, the priest began by awakening amour-propre and self-esteem in him. Rousseau describes the efforts of the Savoyard vicar to save a young man from moral degradation by rekindling his sense of self-worth and dignity. The vicar understands that in order to inspire the young man to lead a virtuous life, he must first help him regain a positive sense of himself. By nurturing his self-esteem, the vicar aims to restore his motivation to live a meaningful and honorable life. Rousseau sees self-love, when properly directed, as an essential component of moral development, enabling individuals to rise above their circumstances and strive for goodness. Quote 94. Peace of soul consists for everything which can trouble it. The man who sets the greatest store by life is he who knows least how to enjoy it. And the one who aspires most avidly to happiness is always most miserable. Rousseau argues that true inner peace comes from detaching oneself from things that cause distress or turmoil, He suggests that those who are overly attached to life and who place too much importance on external factors in their pursuit of happiness are the least likely to achieve contentment. By contrast, those who can rise above their desires and remain indifferent to material or superficial concerns are more likely to find peace. Rousseau's message is that happiness is not found through constant striving or attachment to external pleasures, but through the ability to remain unaffected by life's ups and downs. These quotes and explanations delve into Rousseau's perspectives on conscience, religion, moral development, and the pursuit of happiness. Let me know if you need further analysis or additional reflections on these themes. Quote 95. To see two objects at once is not to see their relations or to judge their differences. To perceive several objects as separate from one another is not to number them. Rousseau points out that merely perceiving multiple objects is not enough to understand their relationships or differences. To compare objects and form judgments about them requires an active process of reflection, which is different from passive sensory perception. Seeing two sticks, for instance, does not automatically lead one to conclude that one is shorter or longer than the other. Similarly, seeing multiple fingers does not mean they are counted. The comparison and comprehension of relationships between objects involve an intellectual process beyond just perceiving them. Rousseau emphasizes that the capacity to compare and judge is a mental activity that goes beyond simple sensory input. Quote 96. Let this or that name be given to this force of my mind, which brings together and compares my sensations. Let it be called attention, meditation, reflection, or whatever one wishes. It is still true that it is in me and not in things, that it is I alone who produce it, although I produce it only on the occasion of the impression made on me by objects. Rousseau emphasizes that the mental force enabling him to connect and compare sensations, whether called attention, meditation, or reflection, is an active process that originates within him rather than from external objects. Although sensations are triggered by external stimuli, the process of connecting them and forming judgments is an internal and active effort made by the mind. This distinction highlights the role of the individual in interpreting sensory information, suggesting that human consciousness involves both passive reception of sensations and active participation in making sense of them. Quote 97. Having, so to speak, made certain of myself, I begin to look outside of myself, and I consider myself with a sort of shudder, cast out and lost in this vast universe, as if drowned in the immensity of beings, without knowing anything about what they are, either in themselves or in relation to me. Rousseau describes a moment of existential contemplation, in which he perceives himself as a small part of the vast universe. This realization evokes a sense of awe and disorientation, as he acknowledges the immensity of existence and his own limitations in understanding the nature of other beings or his relationship to them. Despite the depth of human introspection, he recognizes that the external universe remains largely mysterious. This awareness leads him to reflect on his place in the grand scheme of things, evoking both humility and a sense of the profound unknown. Quote 98. If I have to accept general laws whose essential relations with matter I do not perceive, how does that help me? These laws, not being real beings or substances, must have some other foundation which is unknown to me. Rousseau questions the utility of accepting general laws about the universe when their fundamental relationship to matter remains unclear. He suggests that such laws, lacking physical substance, must be based on some other underlying principle that remains beyond human understanding. This reflection emphasizes the limits of human reason when trying to comprehend the true nature of the universe. Rousseau hints that there are deeper truths that underlie the laws governing the world, truths that may be beyond the reach of human perception or explanation. Quote 99. If moved matter shows me a will, matter moved according to certain laws shows me an intelligence. This is my second article of faith. To act, to compare, and to choose are operations of an active and thinking being. Therefore, this being exists. Rousseau articulates his belief that the existence of movement and order in the universe points to an underlying intelligence. He observes that motion itself implies the presence of a will, while the regularity and laws governing this motion suggest an intelligent force. From this, he concludes that there must be an active and thinking being, an intelligence, that governs the universe. This belief becomes a foundational part of his understanding of the world, affirming his conviction that the order observed in nature is evidence of a higher, conscious force guiding it. Quote 100. Man lives only halfway during his life, and the life of the soul begins only with the death of the body. Rousseau suggests that human beings experience only a partial existence during their earthly lives, as much of their existence is tied to the limitations of the body. True life, which is the life of the soul, begins only after the death of the physical body. This perspective reflects Rousseau's belief in the immortality of the soul and the idea that the true essence of a person, unencumbered by physical limitations, emerges after death. For Rousseau, the full realization of human potential and spiritual life occurs only when the constraints of the body are removed. Quote 101. The less I can conceive it, the more I worship it. I humble myself and say to him, Being of beings, I am because you are. It is to lift myself up to my source, to meditate on you ceaselessly. Rousseau acknowledges that the infinite essence of God is beyond human comprehension. He explains that the more he struggles to understand God's nature, the more his sense of awe and humility grows. Instead of attempting to fully grasp the divine, Rousseau embraces the mystery, finding spiritual fulfillment in meditating on the greatness of God. For him, the inability to fully understand God becomes a source of reverence, leading to a deeper connection through contemplation and humility. This perspective reflects Rousseau's belief that faith does not require complete intellectual understanding, but rather an acknowledgement of the limits of human reason and a willingness to. Quote 102. Conscience is the voice of the soul. The passions are the voice of the body. Is it surprising that these two languages often are contradictory? And then, which should be listened to? Too often reason deceives us. We have acquired only too much right to challenge it. But conscience never deceives. It is man's true guide. Rousseau describes conscience as the voice of the soul, while passions are the voice of the body. He acknowledges that these two forces often contradict each other, leading to internal conflict. In such cases, Rousseau believes that conscience is the true guide, as it represents the moral and spiritual core of a person. While reason can be influenced by biases and may lead one astray, conscience, as an innate moral compass, remains reliable. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of following one's conscience, suggesting that it is the most trustworthy source for making ethical decisions, even when reason and passions are in conflict. Quote 103. The best of all casuists is the conscience, and it is only when one haggles with it that one has recourse to the subtleties of reasoning. Rousseau argues that conscience is the best guide for making moral decisions, implying that it provides clear and straightforward answers to questions of right and wrong. He criticizes the tendency to overcomplicate ethical choices by using convoluted reasoning, suggesting that this often happens when people try to justify actions that go against their conscience. By relying on complex arguments instead of listening to their inner moral voice, individuals risk deceiving themselves. For Rousseau, conscience is a simple yet powerful force that should guide human behavior without the need for excessive rationalization. Quote 104. The first of all cares is the care for oneself. Nevertheless, how many times does the inner voice tell us that, in doing our good at another's expense, we do wrong? Rousseau asserts that self-preservation is a natural and primary concern for every individual. However, he also points out that conscience often reminds us that pursuing our own good should not come at the expense of others. This inner voice serves as a moral check, ensuring that self-interest does not lead to harmful actions against others. Rousseau highlights the tension between self-preservation and ethical behavior, emphasizing that true moral conduct involves balancing one's own needs with the well-being of others. By listening to the voice of conscience, individuals can navigate this balance and act in a way that is just and compassionate. Quote 105. Conscience, conscience, divine instinct, immortal and celestial voice, certain guide of a being that is ignorant and limited, but intelligent and free, infallible judge of good and bad, which makes man like unto God. It is you who make the excellence of his nature and the morality of his actions. Rousseau exalts conscience as a divine instinct and an infallible guide for humans, who are inherently limited in their understanding but possess intelligence and free will. He views conscience as a celestial voice that helps distinguish between good and bad, thereby elevating human nature and giving moral value to human actions. By following their conscience, individuals are able to act in accordance with a higher moral order, making them akin to the divine. Rousseau believes that conscience is what sets humans apart from other creatures and enables them to achieve moral excellence, guiding them toward virtuous behavior. Quote 106. He whose vile passions have stifled these delicious sentiments in his narrow soul, and who, by dint of self-centeredness, succeeds in loving only himself, has no more transports. His icy heart no longer palpitates with joy. A sweet tenderness never moistens his eyes. He has no more joy in anything. This unfortunate man no longer feels, no longer lives. He is already dead. Rousseau describes the emotional emptiness of a person who has allowed selfish passions to dominate their soul, resulting in an inability to experience genuine emotions such as compassion or tenderness. He portrays such a person as spiritually dead, lacking the capacity for true joy and emotional connection. By focusing solely on themselves, they lose the ability to feel deeply, becoming disconnected from the beauty of life and the emotions that bring meaning to human existence. Rousseau suggests that true fulfillment comes from transcending selfish desires and embracing the sentiments that connect us to others, warning against the desolate state of those who fail to do so. Quote 107. The best of all religions is infallibly the clearest. He who burdens the worship he teaches me with mysteries and contradictions teaches me thereby to distrust it. The God I worship is not a God of shadows. He did not endow me with an understanding in order to forbid me its use. Rousseau emphasizes that the best religion is one that is clear, simple, and comprehensible. He argues that when religious teachings are shrouded in mystery and filled with contradictions, they become difficult to trust. Rousseau believes that God endowed humans with reason for a purpose, and it would be an insult to the divine to demand that people ignore their rational faculties in matters of faith. He prefers a concept of God who is open and understandable, rather than one who expects blind submission. For Rousseau, true faith should be consistent with reason, and any doctrine that requires the suppression of rational thought is unworthy of belief. Quote 108. If natural religion is insufficient, this is due to the obscurity in which it leaves the great truths it teaches us. It is for revelation to teach in a manner evident to man's mind, to put them within his reach, to make him conceive them in order that he may believe them. Rousseau acknowledges that while natural religion can reveal certain truths, it often lacks the clarity necessary to provide a complete understanding of the divine. He suggests that revelation should bridge this gap by making these truths accessible to the human mind, allowing people to fully comprehend and believe in them. The role of revelation, then, is not to obscure, but to clarify, presenting divine truths in a way that individuals can grasp with their reason. Rousseau insists that religious truths must be intelligible and accessible, rather than abstract and beyond human understanding. Quote 109. The understanding he gave you, small and vain man, as if you were the first impious person led astray by his reason corrupted by sin. In this dialogue, Rousseau presents the argument of a religious zealot who dismisses the value of human reason, implying that relying on one's own understanding is a sign of arrogance and a path toward sin. This character accuses those who trust in their reason of being led astray, suggesting that human intellect is inherently flawed due to its susceptibility to sin. Rousseau uses this argument to highlight the tension between faith and reason, illustrating how some religious authorities undermine human rationality to assert their own authority. He invites readers to question whether reason, a gift from God, should truly be considered a source of corruption. Quote 110. If there is only one true religion, and every man is obliged to follow it under penalty of damnation, one's life must be spent in studying them all, in going deeper into them, in comparing them, in roaming around the country where each is established. No one is exempt from the first duty of man. No one has a right to rely on the judgment of others. Rousseau points out the difficulty of determining which religion is the true one if each claims to be exclusive. He argues that if salvation depends on adhering to the correct faith, then every individual would need to spend their entire life examining, comparing, and traveling to study different religions in depth. He rejects the idea that people can rely solely on the judgment of others in such a critical matter, as it would mean placing their eternal fate in someone else's hands. This reasoning highlights the impracticality and absurdity of expecting people to blindly accept one religion as true without proper understanding or investigation. Quote 111. I closed all the books. There is one open to all eyes. It is the book of nature. It is from this great and sublime book that I learned to serve and worship its divine author. No one can be excused for not reading it, because it speaks to all men a language that is intelligible to all minds. Rousseau rejects relying on written religious texts as the sole source of divine knowledge, instead turning to the natural world as the most accessible and universal revelation of God. He sees nature as a book that is open to everyone, written in a language that all can understand regardless of education or cultural background. By observing the beauty and order of nature, Rousseau believes that individuals can learn about the divine and understand how to serve and worship God. This perspective underscores his belief in a form of natural religion that transcends the complexities and exclusivities of doctrinal texts. Quote 112. My son, keep your soul in a condition where it always desires that there be a God, and you shall never doubt it. What is more, whatever decision you may make, bear in mind that the true duties of religion are independent of the institutions of men, that a just heart is the true temple of the divinity, that in every country and in every sect the sum of the law is to love God above everything and one's neighbor as oneself. Rousseau advises his young listener to maintain a sincere and open heart, always longing for the existence of God. He emphasizes that the essence of religious duty is not tied to specific institutions or rituals, but resides in having a just and compassionate heart. The core of all true religious practice, according to Rousseau, is the love of God and the love of one's neighbor. This universal principle transcends the boundaries of different cultures and religions, pointing to a fundamental truth that unites all sincere expressions of faith. Rousseau's message is that genuine devotion is rooted in love and moral conduct, rather than adherence to formal religious practices. Quote 113. We work in collaboration with nature, and while it forms the physical man, we try to form the moral man. But we do not make the same progress. The body is already robust and strong, while the soul is still languorous and weak. And no matter what human art does, temperament always precedes reason. Rousseau emphasizes the partnership between human upbringing and nature, highlighting the different rates at which the body and the soul develop. Nature takes care of physical growth, and humans are responsible for moral and intellectual formation. However, there is often a discrepancy in this growth. While the body may become strong and robust, the soul remains weak, and reason is slower to develop. Rousseau acknowledges that, Despite human efforts to cultivate reason, natural instincts and temperament tend to take precedence. This reflects his view that moral education must be patient and gradual, accommodating the natural unfolding of a young person's capabilities rather than forcing them to conform prematurely. Quote 1 and 14. It is only then that he finds his true interest in being good, in doing good far from the sight of men, and without being forced by the laws, in being just between God and himself, in fulfilling his duty, even at the expense of his life, and in carrying virtue in his heart. Rousseau argues that a person truly embraces goodness when they act virtuously for its own sake, without seeking external recognition or reward. True morality is about doing good away from the public eye, guided by one's inner sense of duty rather than laws or social pressures. Rousseau believes that when a person reaches a point where their actions are governed by their conscience, and they are willing to uphold virtue even at great personal cost, they have achieved a deep and meaningful form of morality. This type of goodness is rooted in the love of both God and oneself, and it forms the foundation of enduring happiness and integrity. Quote 115. Emile, on the contrary, considers it an honor to make himself a man, and to subject himself to the yoke of nascent reason. His body, already formed, no longer needs the same movements, and by itself begins to quiet down, while his mind, half-developed, seeks its turn to take flight. Rousseau describes how Emile willingly accepts the responsibility of growing into an adult by embracing the discipline of reason. Unlike many young people who see freedom as the absence of restraint, Emile views the adoption of reason as an honorable step towards maturity. As Emile's physical needs and impulses begin to settle, his mind becomes ready for more intellectual and reflective pursuits. Rousseau emphasizes that true freedom comes from mastering oneself through reason, and that this progression is natural as the body and mind grow in tandem. Emile's journey illustrates Rousseau's belief in the importance of cultivating reason at the right stage in life, when the individual is both willing and ready to do so. Quote 116. From now on, treat him as such. What? Must I abdicate my authority when it is most necessary to me? Must the adult be left to himself at the moment when he least knows how to conduct himself, and when he makes the greatest slips? Must I renounce my rights when it is most important for him that I make use of them? Rousseau addresses the transition in Emile's life from pupil to young adult, and the educator's role in guiding him through this critical period. He acknowledges the apparent paradox of relinquishing authority at the very time when it seems most necessary. During adolescence, when young people are most prone to errors and in need of guidance, Rousseau argues that it is crucial to maintain an influence over them. However, the nature of this influence must change, from one of control to one of friendship and mutual respect. This nuanced approach ensures that Emile remains accountable for his actions, while still benefiting from the wisdom and experience of his educator. Quote 117. The sentiment attaching him to you is the only permanent one. All the others pass and blot one another out. Do not let him be corrupted. He will always be docile. He will not begin to be rebellious until he is already depraved. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of maintaining a strong emotional bond between the educator and the student. He believes that the relationship, built on trust, affection, and respect, is the most enduring influence on a young person. If this connection remains intact, the student will continue to be receptive and obedient, even as other emotions and passions come and go. However, if the young person becomes morally corrupted, they will lose their respect for authority and become rebellious. Rousseau suggests that the key to preventing such rebellion is to nurture the innate goodness of the student and to preserve the emotional connection that forms the foundation of their relationship. Quote 118. Therefore, even after the preparations of which I have spoken, I shall be very careful not to go all of a sudden to Emile's room and pompously make a long speech to him about the subject in which I want to instruct him. I shall begin by moving his imagination. I shall choose the time, the place, and the objects most favorable to the impression I want to make. Rousseau underscores the importance of timing and context in educating young people about complex subjects. He explains that simply presenting a lecture without consideration for the student's emotional state or environment would be ineffective. Instead, Rousseau plans to create a setting that will engage Emile's imagination and emotions, making him more receptive to the lesson. By carefully choosing the right moment, location, and atmosphere, Rousseau aims to ensure that his teaching resonates deeply with Emile, leaving a lasting impression. This approach reflects his broader belief that education should be tailored to the individual, and that effective learning requires more than just the transmission of information. It requires the engagement of the whole person. Quote 119. If I wish to be austere and dry with my pupil, I shall lose his confidence, and soon he will hide himself from me. If I wish to be agreeable and pliant, or to close my eyes, what is the use of his being under my protection? I only authorize his disorder and relieve his conscience at the expense of mine. Rousseau addresses the challenge of maintaining a balance in the educator-student relationship. He explains that if an educator is too strict and rigid, the student will lose trust and distance themselves emotionally, hiding their true feelings and actions. On the other hand, if the educator is too lenient or indulgent, it undermines the purpose of guidance, as the student will not learn discipline or responsibility. Rousseau emphasizes the need for a balanced approach, one that encourages openness and trust, without condoning or ignoring misbehavior. This balance ensures that the student respects the educator's guidance, while also feeling understood and supported. Quote 120. If I introduce him to society with the sole aim of instructing him, he will instruct himself more than I want. If I keep him away from society to the end, what will he have learned from me? Everything, perhaps, except the most necessary art for a man and a citizen, which is knowing how to live with his fellows. Rousseau points out the limitations of isolating a student from society. He argues that if Emile is introduced to society only for instruction, he may end up learning more than what Rousseau intends, potentially being exposed to negative influences. However, if Emile is kept away from society indefinitely, he will miss out on learning one of the most crucial skills: how to coexist and interact with others. Rousseau acknowledges the complexity of guiding a young person in a social context, emphasizing the importance of exposure to society in a controlled way, allowing Emile to learn social skills while being protected from its potential dangers. Quote 121. And what is true love itself, if it is not chimera, lie, and illusion? We love the image we make for ourselves far more than we love the object to which we apply it. If we saw what we love exactly as it is, there would be no more love on earth. Rousseau offers a philosophical reflection on the nature of love, suggesting that it is largely based on illusion and idealization. He argues that what people truly love is not the person themselves, but the idealized image they create of that person. This illusion is what sustains the feeling of love. Rousseau believes that if individuals were to see their beloved exactly as they are, with all their flaws and imperfections, the romantic enchantment would vanish, and love would cease to exist. This perspective highlights the role of imagination and idealization in sustaining emotional attachments. Quote 122. Thus, a young man entering society must be preserved less from sensuality than from vanity. He yields more to the inclinations of others than to his own, and amour propre produces more libertines than love does. Rousseau argues that vanity, or amour propre, is a greater danger for a young person entering society than sensuality. He believes that young people often engage in reckless behavior not out of genuine desire, but because they want to fit in or gain approval from others. Vanity, rather than authentic love or passion, is what leads many young people astray. Rousseau suggests that the need to conform and impress others, driven by vanity, is responsible for more moral corruption than actual sensual desires. Therefore, protecting Emile from the societal vanity is more crucial than shielding him from natural passions. Quote 123. He has hardly entered society when he receives there a second education completely opposed to his first, an education from which he learns to despise what he esteemed and to esteem what he despised. He is made to regard the lessons of his parents and his masters as a pedantic jargon, and the duties they have preached to him as a puerile morality that ought to be disdained when one has grown up. Rousseau describes the corrupting influence of society on a young person who has just been introduced to it. The initial moral and virtuous education imparted by parents and teachers is often undermined by the pressures of societal norms. As the young person enters society, they are taught to reject the values they were once taught to cherish, and to embrace behaviors that they were once taught to despise. This second education reverses the lessons of the first, leading to a rejection of genuine virtue in favor of superficial conformity. Rousseau warns against the power of societal influence to distort and undermine the moral foundation established during childhood. Quote 124. Taste is corrupted by an excessive delicacy which creates a sensitivity to things that the bulk of men do not perceive. This delicacy leads to a spirit of discussion, for the more subtle one is about things, the more they multiply. Rousseau argues that excessive refinement of taste can lead to overcomplication and unnecessary debate. When people become overly delicate in their preferences, they begin to notice distinctions that are insignificant to the majority. This heightened sensitivity results in endless discussions and a divergence of tastes, making it difficult for people to agree on simple pleasures. Rousseau suggests that this over-refinement complicates life rather than enriching it, implying that simplicity and a grounded sense of taste are more conducive to genuine satisfaction and shared understanding. Quote 125. In general, Emile will get more of a taste for the books of the ancients than for ours, for the sole reason that the ancients, since they came first, are closest to nature, and their genius is more their own. Rousseau believes that Emile will naturally prefer the works of ancient authors over modern ones because the ancients were closer to nature and less influenced by the complexities of civilization. The genius of the ancients, according to Rousseau, was more original and pure, as they relied on their own insights rather than building upon the accumulated knowledge of previous generations. This closer connection to nature made their writings more authentic and less clouded by artificial conventions. Rousseau values the simplicity and directness of ancient literature, which he believes fosters a deeper and more genuine appreciation of the human experience. Quote 126. My principal aim in teaching him to feel and to love the beautiful of all sorts is to fix his affections and tastes on it, to prevent his natural appetites from becoming corrupted. To it, that he does not one day seek in his riches the means for being happy, means that he ought to find nearer to him. Rousseau emphasizes that his primary goal in Emile's education is to cultivate a love for beauty in all its forms, which will help anchor his desires and prevent them from being corrupted by superficial pursuits. By instilling a deep appreciation for beauty, Rousseau hopes to guide Emile away from seeking happiness in material wealth and instead find contentment in the simple, accessible pleasures that are naturally available to him. This approach aims to foster a sense of fulfillment that is independent of riches and rooted in a genuine connection to the world around him. Quote 127. I take him to the theater to study not morals, but taste, for it is here that taste reveals itself to those who know how to reflect. Leave aside precepts and morality, I would say to him. It is not here that they are to be learned. Rousseau explains that the purpose of taking Emile to the theater is not to teach him morals, but to help him develop a sense of taste. The theater, according to Rousseau, is a place where taste is expressed, and where one can observe the subtleties of human emotion and artistic expression. He makes it clear to Emile that the lessons to be learned in the theater are not about morality, but about understanding human nature and appreciating the artistry involved. By observing how the theater aims to entertain and engage the audience, Emile can develop a nuanced understanding of taste without confusing it with moral instruction. Quote 128. The world itself is a fine enough palace. Does not everything belong to the rich man when he wants to enjoy himself? Ubi bene, ibi patria is his motto. His liras are the places where money can buy anything. His country is wherever his strong box can go. Rousseau reflects on the perspective of a wealthy individual who sees the entire world as his domain, free to enjoy whatever he pleases thanks to his wealth. The motto, ubi bene, ibi patria, meaning, where it is well, there is my country, captures the idea that for a rich person, home is wherever he finds comfort and pleasure. Rousseau criticizes this detached and materialistic view, suggesting that it lacks any true sense of belonging or deeper connection to place. Instead of finding value in specific places or communities, the rich man sees only opportunities for consumption and self-indulgence, making his world one of superficiality rather than genuine connection. Quote 129. Let us change tastes with the years. Let us not displace ages any more than seasons. One must be oneself at all times, and not battle against nature. Such vain efforts use up life and prevent us from making good use of it. Rousseau advises embracing the natural progression of life rather than resisting it. He believes that as people grow older, their tastes and preferences should evolve accordingly, just as the seasons change naturally. To resist these changes and try to cling to youthful desires or behaviors is to fight against nature, which only leads to wasted energy and a diminished quality of life. Rousseau encourages people to be true to themselves at each stage of life, accepting the transitions that come with age and finding fulfillment in the present rather than in futile attempts to recapture the past. Quote 130. Sophie ought to be a woman as Emile is a man. That is to say, she ought to have everything which suits the constitution of her species and her sex in order to fill her place in the physical and moral order. Rousseau begins his discussion of Sophie by emphasizing that she must be educated to embody all that is suitable for her as a woman, just as Emile has been educated to embody all that is suitable for a man. He believes that men and women have different roles within both the physical and moral orders, and that these roles are defined by the natural differences between the sexes. By fulfilling the unique qualities and responsibilities assigned to her by nature, Sophie is meant to complement Emile, creating harmony between them. Rousseau's view is that the education of men and women should differ in accordance with their inherent biological and psychological differences. Quote 131. In everything not connected with sex, woman is man. She has the same organs, the same needs, the same faculties. The machine is constructed in the same way. Its parts are the same. The one functions as does the other. The form is similar, and in whatever respect one considers them, the difference between them is only one of more or less. Rousseau argues that men and women are fundamentally similar in every aspect, except those that are directly related to sex. Both share the same physical and biological structures, with similar needs and capacities. The differences between men and women, according to Rousseau, are not about having different faculties, but rather about having variations in degree, differences of more or less. He believes that these differences are nuanced but significant when it comes to their functions and roles in society. This assertion serves as a foundation for his later argument that the social and moral education of men and women should reflect their natural roles. 2. In the union of the sexes, each contributes equally to the common aim, but not in the same way. From this diversity arises the first assignable difference in the moral relations of the two sexes. One ought to be active and strong, the other passive and weak. Rousseau explains that while men and women contribute equally to the goals of their union, they do so in fundamentally different ways. Men are characterized as active and strong, while women are described as passive and weak. This distinction, according to Rousseau, gives rise to different moral responsibilities and relationships for each sex. He believes that these complementary roles are natural and necessary for maintaining social harmony. For Rousseau, acknowledging these differences allows each gender to fulfill their unique functions within the family and society as a whole, reinforcing the idea that equality does not mean sameness. Quote 133. If woman is made to please and to be subjugated, she ought to make herself agreeable to man instead of arousing him. Her own violence is in her charms. It is by these that she ought to constrain him to find his strength and make use of it. Rousseau asserts that a woman's role is to be pleasing and submissive, and that her power lies in her ability to charm rather than to incite. He believes that women should use their attractiveness and gentle persuasion to influence men, rather than attempting to assert themselves through direct confrontation. By making herself agreeable, a woman can inspire a man to be strong and assertive, fulfilling what Rousseau sees as their natural roles. This perspective reflects Rousseau's belief in the importance of maintaining traditional gender dynamics, where women wield influence indirectly and men are encouraged to take active leadership roles. Quote 134. The stronger appears to be master, but actually depends on the weaker. This is due not to a frivolous practice of gallantry or to the proud generosity of a protector, but to an invariable law of nature which gives woman more facility to excite the desires than man to satisfy them. Rousseau points out that while men may appear to be the dominant sex, they are actually dependent on women due to their power to arouse desire. He argues that this dependence is not a superficial social construct, but a natural law, as women are better able to evoke desire than men are to fulfill it. This dynamic gives women a kind of hidden power, even if men seem to hold the formal authority. Rousseau suggests that this interplay between the sexes is inherent and inescapable, and that true strength lies in the subtle influence women wield over men by appealing to their desires. Quote 135. Once it is demonstrated that man and woman are not and ought not to be constituted in the same way in either character or temperament, it follows that they ought not to have the same education. Rousseau argues that since men and women have different natural constitutions, both physically and psychologically, it logically follows that they should not receive the same education. He believes that the differences in character and temperament between the sexes are significant enough to require distinct educational approaches tailored to their respective roles in society. For Rousseau, the goal of education is to cultivate the qualities that are most suitable for each gender, ensuring that both men and women are well prepared to fulfill their natural functions and contribute harmoniously to the family and community. Quote 136. To cultivate man's qualities in women and to neglect those which are proper to them is obviously to work to their detriment. Crafty women see this too well to be duped by it. In trying to usurp our advantages, they do not abandon theirs. Rousseau argues that attempting to instill traditionally masculine qualities in women while neglecting those that are natural to them ultimately harms women. He suggests that women who seek to adopt male attributes often do so without giving up their inherent feminine qualities, which leads to a mismatch of roles and responsibilities. By trying to take on the strengths of men, these women fail to fully embody their own strengths and end up being less effective in both roles. Rousseau believes that true fulfillment for women lies in embracing their natural attributes rather than attempting to compete with men on their terms. Quote 137. The most unfortunate effect of formal politeness is to teach the art of getting along without the virtues it imitates. Let humanity and beneficence be inspired in us by education, and we shall have politeness, or we shall no longer need it. Rousseau argues that formal politeness often serves as a superficial substitute for genuine virtue. Instead of cultivating true kindness and compassion, society teaches people to follow formal rules of politeness, which allows them to navigate social situations without necessarily embodying the underlying virtues. He suggests that if individuals are taught genuine humanity and beneficence from a young age, formal politeness would either naturally follow or become unnecessary. For Rousseau, true virtue should not be an imitation or a set of learned behaviors, but an integral part of one's character that makes formal social conventions redundant. Quote 138. This peculiar cleverness given to the fair sex is a very equitable compensation for their lesser share of strength, a compensation without which women would be not man's companion, but his slave. It is by means of this superiority in talent that she keeps herself his equal and that she governs him while obeying him. Rousseau discusses the cleverness and resourcefulness that he believes women possess as a natural compensation for their physical weakness compared to men. This cleverness, which is often associated with subtlety and adaptability, allows women to maintain equality with men despite their lesser physical strength. Rousseau views this attribute as essential for ensuring that women are not reduced to mere subordination. By using their intelligence and charm, women can influence and guide men, thereby balancing the dynamic of authority and dependence. For Rousseau, this cleverness ensures that women remain partners rather than subordinates, preserving a sense of equality within the relationship. Quote 139. One can shine by means of adornment, but one can please only by means of one's person. We are not our clothes. Often they detract from us by their elaborateness. The clothes that make the woman who wears them most noticed are often those that are least noticed in themselves. Rousseau makes a distinction between superficial beauty and true attractiveness. He argues that while adornments may make a person stand out, true charm comes from one's character and natural presence. Clothes, often elaborate and meant to draw attention, can sometimes distract from the true person rather than enhance their appeal. He suggests that the most effective way to be genuinely pleasing is to rely less on external decorations and more on one's own qualities. Rousseau emphasizes that true beauty is not about elaborate clothing, but about allowing one's natural attributes to shine through, with adornment serving only as a complement, not the primary attraction. Quote 140. If I saw the young girl strutting in her finery, I would appear anxious about her looks being disguised in this way, and about what someone might think about it. I would say, all these ornaments adorn her too much. That's too bad. Do you believe that she could get by with simpler ones? Is she beautiful enough to do without this one, or that one? Rousseau describes how he would discourage a young girl from placing too much value on elaborate adornment. He would express concern that excessive finery disguises her true beauty, suggesting that she might be relying on her clothing rather than her natural charm. By questioning whether she could be beautiful without the adornments, Rousseau aims to make the girl reconsider her reliance on external decorations. He believes that true beauty should not need such embellishments and that simplicity often highlights a person's natural grace better than elaborate adornment. This approach is intended to help young girls understand that their worth and beauty lie within themselves, not in the clothes they wear. Quote 141. A young girl ought not to live like her grandmother. She ought to be lively, playful, and frolicsome, to sing and dance pleases, and to taste all the innocent pleasures of her age. The time to be composed and to adopt a more serious bearing will come only too soon. Rousseau believes that young girls should be allowed to enjoy the pleasures of their youth, including playfulness, singing, and dancing. He argues that it is inappropriate to impose the same restrictions on young girls that might be suitable for their elders, as they should be free to experience the joys and innocence of their age. The expectation that they should be composed and serious can come later in life, as maturity brings its own set of responsibilities. By allowing young girls to express themselves freely and fully during their youth, Rousseau believes they will be better prepared to take on the more serious roles expected of them later. Quote 142. The use of reason that leads woman to the knowledge of her duties is even simpler. The obedience and the fidelity she owes to her husband, and the tenderness and the care she owes to her children, are consequences of her position so natural and easily sensed that she cannot without bad faith refuse her consent to the inner sentiment that guides her. Rousseau argues that the use of reason for women is simpler than for men, as it primarily involves understanding their duties within the family. He believes that a woman's responsibilities, obedience and loyalty to her husband and care for her children, are natural consequences of her role and are easily understood through an inner moral sense. For Rousseau, these duties are inherent to a woman's nature, and recognizing them is a matter of accepting the guidance of her conscience. He implies that any refusal to acknowledge these duties would be an act of deliberate denial rather than a failure of understanding, as they are so closely tied to her natural inclinations. Quote 143. On what does this whole art depend, if not on sharp and continuous observations, which make her see what is going on in men's hearts at every instant, and which dispose her to bring to each secret movement that she notices the force needed to suspend or accelerate it? Now, is this art learned? No, it is born with women. They all possess it, and men never have it to the same degree. This is one of the distinctive characteristics of the fair sex. Rousseau asserts that women possess an innate ability to understand the emotions and motivations of men, using their observational skills to influence or direct these emotions effectively. He refers to this ability as an art that is natural to women, not something learned. It allows women to respond to the subtle cues they observe in men, shaping their behavior accordingly. Rousseau believes that this unique characteristic gives women an advantage in understanding the nuances of human relationships, and he contrasts it with men who do not possess the same degree of emotional insight. This natural skill, in his view, is one of the essential qualities that distinguishes women and enables them to navigate complex social dynamics. Quote 144. We are told that women are false. They become so. Their particular gift is skill and not falseness. According to the true inclinations of their sex, even when they are lying, they are not false. Why do you consult their mouth when it is not the mouth which ought to speak? Consult their eyes, their color, their breathing, their fearful manner, their soft resistance. This is the language nature gives them for answering you. Rousseau challenges the notion that women are inherently deceitful, arguing that they develop falsehoods as a response to social expectations and constraints. He believes that women are naturally gifted with a different form of communication, one that is expressed through their eyes, gestures, and subtle behaviors rather than their words. When women do lie verbally, Rousseau suggests that their true feelings can still be discerned through their nonverbal cues. This form of communication is an adaptation to societal norms, which often limit women's ability to express themselves openly. Rousseau views this as a reflection of women's skill in navigating social expectations while remaining true to their natural inclinations. Quote 145. The essential thing is to be what nature made us. A woman is always only too much what men want her to be. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of embracing one's natural identity, particularly for women, who he believes are often pressured to conform to the expectations of men. He argues that women tend to mold themselves to fit the desires of men, losing touch with their true selves in the process. This conformity undermines the unique qualities that nature has endowed them with. Rousseau advocates for women to remain authentic, embracing their natural characteristics rather than trying to fulfill the roles imposed on them by men. By doing so, women can maintain their individuality and contribute to society in a way that aligns with their true nature. Quote 146. Woman has more wit, man more genius. Woman observes, and man reasons. From this conjunction results the clearest insight and the most complete science regarding itself that the human mind can acquire. In a word, the surest knowledge of oneself and others available to our species. Rousseau distinguishes between the intellectual qualities of men and women, asserting that women possess wit and observational skills, while men excel in reasoning and theoretical thinking. He believes that the combination of these attributes leads to the most comprehensive understanding of human nature. Women's ability to keenly observe the behaviors and emotions of others complements men's capacity for abstract reasoning, creating a balanced and holistic view of human life. Rousseau suggests that this partnership between male and female ways of thinking is essential for achieving a true understanding of oneself and others, emphasizing the complementary roles of both sexes in the pursuit of knowledge. Quote 147. In order to love the peaceful and domestic life, we must know it. We must have sensed its sweetness from childhood. It is only in the paternal home that one gets the taste for one's own home, and any woman whose mother has not raised her will not like raising her own children. Rousseau argues that a love for domestic life is cultivated through early experiences within the family. He believes that children must be exposed to the comforts and joys of home life from an early age in order to develop an appreciation for it later in life. Specifically, he emphasizes that a woman who has not been raised by her mother will struggle to enjoy the responsibilities of raising her own children. For Rousseau, the foundation of a woman's love for domesticity is laid in the paternal home, where she learns by observing and participating in family life. This early exposure instills a sense of fulfillment in carrying on those same duties in her own household. Quote 148. If, in spite of the general corruption, in spite of universal prejudices, and in spite of the bad education of girls, some still preserve a judgment that withstands the test, what will it be when this judgment has been nourished by suitable instruction? Or, to put it better, when it has not been corrupted by vicious instruction? For everything always consists in preserving or in restoring the natural sentiments. Rousseau acknowledges that despite widespread social corruption and the flawed education typically given to girls, some women still manage to retain sound judgment. He questions how much greater their potential would be if they were given an appropriate education that nurtured rather than corrupted their natural sentiments. Rousseau believes that true education should focus on preserving the inherent qualities that nature has given to women, rather than distorting them with artificial and harmful influences. By allowing natural inclinations to flourish, women can develop the judgment and virtues that are essential for their roles in society, free from the negative effects of conventional but misguided teachings. Quote 149. The love of fashions is in bad taste, because our visages do not change with them, and since one's looks stay the same, what suits them once suits them always. Rousseau criticizes the obsession with constantly changing fashions, arguing that it is in poor taste because people's physical appearances do not change to match new trends. He believes that what suits someone once will continue to suit them, regardless of the whims of fashion. Rousseau suggests that instead of chasing ever-changing styles, individuals should focus on what genuinely complements their natural features. By doing so, they maintain a sense of authenticity and avoid the superficiality associated with trying to keep up with fleeting trends. This emphasis on simplicity and consistency is part of Rousseau's broader advocacy for naturalness and authenticity. Quote 150. The quest for abstract and speculative truths, principles, and axioms in the sciences, for everything that tends to generalize ideas, is not within the competence of women. All their studies ought to be related to practice. Rousseau argues that women's intellectual pursuits should be oriented towards practical knowledge rather than abstract or speculative thinking. He asserts that women are not naturally suited for dealing with generalized principles or engaging deeply in theoretical sciences. Instead, their education should focus on practical applications that have direct relevance to their roles in family and society. By concentrating on what is useful for everyday life, women can contribute effectively to their households and communities. Rousseau's perspective reflects his belief in distinct educational paths for men and women, each tailored to their perceived natural roles and abilities. Quote 151. Her greatest progress is in ethics and in matters of taste. As for physics, she remembers only some idea of its general laws and of the cosmic system. Rousseau comments on the educational progress of Sophie, noting that her strength lies in ethics and matters of taste rather than in the sciences. He believes that while Sophie can grasp general concepts in subjects like physics, her true aptitude is in understanding morality and aesthetics. This distinction underscores Rousseau's belief that women are better suited to studying subjects related to human behavior and the arts, rather than the rigorous study of natural sciences. He implies that a woman's education should focus on cultivating her moral character and appreciation for beauty, as these are the areas where she is most naturally adept. Quote 152. The art of thinking is not foreign to women, but they ought only to skim the sciences of reasoning. Sophie gets a conception of everything and does not remember very much. Rousseau acknowledges that women are capable of understanding the art of thinking, but he believes that their engagement with intellectual subjects should be limited to a superficial level. He describes Sophie as being able to grasp general ideas, but not retaining them in depth. This view reflects Rousseau's belief that women should not delve deeply into complex subjects, as he sees their role as being more aligned with practical and emotional intelligence rather than analytical rigor. For Rousseau, a woman's education should provide a broad understanding of concepts without requiring an in-depth mastery, allowing her to engage in meaningful conversation without the need for deep expertise. Quote 153. Sophie knows that more studied adornment is a declaration, but she does not know that more casual adornment is also a declaration. Rousseau describes Sophie's approach to her appearance, emphasizing the subtle messages conveyed by the way she presents herself. He notes that while Sophie understands that elaborate adornment can signal her intentions, she may not realize that even a more casual appearance can also communicate something significant. Rousseau suggests that Sophie's choice of simplicity in her dress is an indirect way of signaling her feelings, demonstrating that even modesty can be a form of expression. This reflection highlights the complexity of social cues and the importance of understanding the underlying messages conveyed through personal presentation. Quote 154. The aversion against everything which disturbs and combats our pleasures is a natural emotion. That is incontestable. Up to a certain point, the case is still the same, with the desire for exclusive possession of what pleases us. But when this desire becomes a passion and transforms itself into a fury or a suspicious and gloomy whim called jealousy, then the case is different. Rousseau reflects on the nature of jealousy, acknowledging that it originates from a natural desire to protect the things that bring us pleasure. Initially, this desire for exclusive possession can be understood as an inherent human emotion. However, Rousseau points out that when this feeling intensifies into obsessive jealousy, marked by fury, suspicion, and possessiveness, it loses its natural quality and becomes a damaging passion. He suggests that while it is natural to want to keep what brings us joy, allowing this feeling to develop into jealousy distorts it into something destructive that ultimately harms relationships and personal well-being. Quote 155. After this just reprimand, addressed much more to me than to my pupil, this wise mother departs, and leaves me admiring her rare prudence, which takes little account of one's kissing her daughter's mouth in front of her, but is frightened of someone's daring to kiss her daughter's dress in private. Rousseau recounts a moment when Sophie's mother reprimands Emile for overstepping boundaries. The mother, showing her wisdom, draws a distinction between behavior that is permissible in public and actions that are inappropriate in private. She tolerates certain displays of affection when they occur under her supervision, but fears the consequences of similar behavior in private, where it could lead to more serious transgressions. Rousseau admires her prudence in understanding the difference between acceptable public gestures and the dangers of unchecked private liberties. This distinction underscores the importance of maintaining propriety and respecting boundaries, especially in relationships between young people. Quote 156. She assumes an empire over Emile, which she fears she does not have over Sophie. She uses the one to fight the other. If she were more confident, she would be much less proud. Apart from this one point, what girl in the world is more yielding and sweeter? Rousseau explains that Sophie's apparent pride and strictness toward Emile are actually motivated by her own insecurities. She fears her inability to control her own emotions, so she exercises control over Emile to maintain her sense of stability. Rousseau suggests that if Sophie felt more confident in herself, she would not need to be so severe. Despite this, he acknowledges that Sophie is otherwise gentle, kind, and considerate, qualities that make her endearing and admirable. Her pride is not a reflection of her true nature, but a defensive mechanism she uses to protect herself from vulnerability. Quote 157. The sentiment of independence no longer swells her noble heart. She triumphs with modesty, winning a victory which costs her her freedom. Her bearing is less free, and her speech is more timid now that she no longer hears the word lover without blushing. Rousseau describes how Sophie's demeanor changes after she falls in love with Emile. Once confident and independent, Sophie now feels more modest and restrained, as her love for Emile has made her vulnerable. Her newfound affection has come at the cost of her former freedom, and this change is evident in her more reserved behavior and shy reactions. Rousseau portrays this transformation as a natural consequence of love, which brings both joy and a sense of dependency. Sophie's triumph in love is marked by her willingness to give up some of her independence in favor of a deep emotional connection with Emile. Quote 158. One day when Emile has gone alone, and I am not expecting him until the next day, I see him arrive that same evening. Embracing him, I say, "What, dear Emile? You return to your friend." But, instead of responding to my caresses, he says to me with a bit of bile, "Don't believe that I come back so soon of my own will. I come in spite of myself. She wanted me to come. I come for her, and not for you." Rousseau describes a moment when Emile returns unexpectedly, revealing his devotion to Sophie. Although he has returned earlier than planned, Emile is honest about his motivations, admitting that he came back because Sophie wanted him to, not out of his own desire. Rousseau appreciates Emile's honesty, recognizing the importance of being truthful about one's emotions, even when they may not align with others' expectations. This moment illustrates the deep influence Sophie has over Emile, as well as Emile's commitment to transparency and sincerity in his relationships. Rousseau values this candor as an essential quality in Emile's character. Quote 159. Sophie, you are the arbiter of my fate. You know it well. You can make me die of pain. But do not hope to make me forget the rights of humanity. They are more sacred to me than yours. I will never give them up for you. Rousseau portrays Emile as deeply principled, even in matters of love. Emile declares that Sophie has immense power over him. She could cause him great pain, but his commitment to broader moral values remains paramount. He refuses to abandon his sense of duty and the rights of humanity, even for his beloved. This quote highlights Emile's commitment to moral integrity above personal desire, reinforcing Rousseau's belief in virtue as a guiding principle in life. It is this moral fortitude that elevates Emile's character, as he is unwilling to compromise on values that he considers sacred, regardless of the emotional cost. Quote 160. Emile, take this hand. It is yours. Be my husband and master when you wish. I will try to merit this honor. Sophie offers her hand to Emile, accepting him as her husband and expressing her willingness to be his partner. She acknowledges that she will strive to be worthy of this commitment, showing her understanding of marriage as a mutual responsibility. By calling Emile her husband and master, Sophie aligns herself with Rousseau's view of traditional gender roles, wherein the man takes on the role of protector and guide. Her acceptance reflects her readiness to embrace this dynamic, emphasizing the importance of mutual respect and dedication in their relationship. It also conveys her love and trust, as she willingly places herself under Emile's guidance while aspiring to fulfill her role as a devoted companion. Quote 161. The zeal of charity outweighs modesty. What she does so lightly and with so much skill that he feels relieved almost without having noticed that he has been touched. Rousseau describes Sophie's compassionate actions in tending to the sick and injured. Despite her usual modesty, she sets aside her reservations to provide comfort to those in need. Her gentle touch and skillful care allow her to alleviate the suffering of others without causing them discomfort. Rousseau highlights Sophie's dedication to charity and kindness, showing how her genuine concern for others surpasses her own sense of propriety. This scene underscores the power of empathy and compassion, demonstrating that true virtue often involves putting the needs of others above one's own comfort. Quote 162. You must leave Sophie. Rousseau delivers a painful directive to Emile, instructing him to leave Sophie temporarily. This separation is framed as a necessary test of Emile's strength and commitment, both to himself and to Sophie. Rousseau wants Emile to learn how to exercise control over his emotions and to demonstrate that he can endure hardship for the sake of virtue. The decision to leave Sophie is portrayed as an opportunity for Emile to grow, to prove his devotion not through immediate gratification, but through patience and self-restraint. This test is meant to prepare Emile for the realities of married life, emphasizing that true love requires resilience and sacrifice. Quote 163. My child, there is no happiness without courage, nor virtue without struggle. The word virtue comes from strength. Strength is the foundation of all virtue. Rousseau explains to Emile that true happiness and virtue cannot be achieved without courage and struggle. He emphasizes that the essence of virtue lies in strength, the ability to endure challenges and overcome personal weaknesses. For Rousseau, virtue is not something that comes easily. It requires consistent effort and the willingness to face difficulties. He draws a distinction between goodness, which is a natural inclination, and virtue, which is achieved through deliberate action and perseverance. By encouraging Emile to cultivate inner strength, Rousseau seeks to prepare him for the moral challenges he will face in life, reinforcing the idea that genuine fulfillment comes from overcoming adversity. Quote 164. All passions are good when one remains their master. All are bad when one lets oneself be subjected to them. Rousseau presents his philosophy on passions, arguing that they are inherently neither good nor bad. Instead, their value lies in one's ability to control them. When a person can master their passions, those emotions become a source of motivation and fulfillment. However, if passions are allowed to take control, they become destructive and lead to poor decision-making. This perspective emphasizes the importance of self-discipline and balance. Rousseau wants Emile to understand that the key to leading a virtuous life is not the suppression of emotions, but the ability to direct them in a constructive manner, ensuring they serve rather than dominate. Quote 165. Do you want, then, to live happily and wisely? Attach your heart only to imperishable beauty. Let your condition limit your desires. Let your duties come before your inclinations. Rousseau advises Emile on the path to a happy and wise life, urging him to focus on values that are enduring and unchanging. By attaching his heart to imperishable beauty, Rousseau means that Emile should seek fulfillment in things that are not subject to decay or loss, such as virtue and moral integrity. He also emphasizes the importance of accepting one's circumstances and not allowing desires to exceed what is realistically attainable. By prioritizing duties over personal inclinations, Emile can achieve a sense of purpose and contentment, free from the turmoil of unfulfilled desires. Rousseau's message is that true happiness comes from aligning one's life with enduring values and embracing one's responsibilities. Quote 166. Travel pushes a man toward his natural bent and completes the job of making him good or bad. Whoever returns from roaming the world is, upon his return, what he will be for his whole life. Rousseau discusses the impact of travel on a person's character, suggesting that it amplifies the tendencies that are already present in them. Travel provides experiences that solidify one's character traits, making a person either better or worse based on their inherent disposition. If a person is inclined towards goodness, travel can enrich their understanding and wisdom, making them a better individual. Conversely, if a person has negative tendencies, exposure to the diverse influences encountered while traveling may exacerbate these qualities. Rousseau highlights that travel is not inherently transformative, but rather acts as a catalyst that brings out what is already within an individual, shaping them for life. Quote 167. To travel for the sake of traveling is to wander, to be a vagabond. To travel to inform oneself is still to have too vague an aim. Instruction, which has no determined goal, is nothing. Rousseau argues that travel must have a specific purpose to be meaningful. Simply traveling for the experience of being in different places, without a clear objective, reduces a person to a wanderer without direction. Even traveling for general learning is insufficient unless the learning has a specific focus or goal. For Rousseau, education and experience must be purposeful, with well-defined aims, in order to be truly beneficial. He implies that young people like Emile should travel with a clear intention, ensuring that the experiences they gain contribute meaningfully to their development, rather than being random and unfocused. Quote 168. You are going to find yourself alone in society, dependent on everything, even on your patrimony. You plan to settle down. This plan is laudable. It is one of man's duties. But before marrying, you must know what kind of man you want to be, what you want to spend your life doing, and what measures you want to take to assure yourself and your family of bread. Rousseau emphasizes the importance of self-reflection and preparation before settling down and starting a family. He advises Emile to consider carefully what kind of life he wants to lead and to make plans for supporting himself and his family. According to Rousseau, settling down and marrying is a worthy goal, but it must be approached with a sense of responsibility and foresight. He stresses that Emile must be aware of his own values, ambitions, and practical means of livelihood before committing to a family, as this is crucial for ensuring stability and happiness. Rousseau believes that careful planning and self-knowledge are essential components of a fulfilling life. Quote 169. Do you want to commit yourself to dependence on men whom you despise? Do you want to establish your fortune and determine your status by means of civil relations which will put you constantly at the discretion of others and force you to become a rascal yourself in order to escape from the clutches of other rascals? Rousseau warns Emile about the dangers of pursuing wealth or social status through means that create dependence on others. He questions whether Emile wants to live a life bound by the expectations and control of others, which would inevitably lead him to compromise his morals. Rousseau argues that striving for wealth or power often requires individuals to engage in unethical behavior to protect themselves from others who act in the same way. He encourages Emile to seek independence and self-sufficiency rather than entangling himself in relationships that would compromise his integrity and make him vulnerable to the corrupting influences of society. Quote 170. I agree that if there is any legitimate and sure means of subsisting without intrigue, without involvements, and without dependence, it is to live by cultivating one's own land with the labor of one's own hands. Rousseau advocates for a simple, self-sufficient lifestyle as the most honorable and independent way to live. He believes that cultivating one's own land and relying on one's own labor provides a legitimate means of subsistence, without the need for dependence on others or involvement in complex social entanglements. For Rousseau, this way of life represents true freedom, as it allows a person to live without compromising their values or being subject to the whims of others. He presents the idea of working one's own land as an ideal means of maintaining personal integrity and avoiding the corrupting influences of society. Quote 171. One knows where it is easy to get rich, but who knows where one can get along without being rich? Who knows where one can live independent and free, without needing to harm anyone, and without fear of being harmed? Rousseau questions the feasibility of living a truly independent and free life without the need for wealth. He points out that while it is well known where one can accumulate wealth, it is much more challenging to find a place where one can live simply and peacefully without needing to rely on riches. Rousseau suggests that the pursuit of independence and freedom is often fraught with challenges, particularly in a world where social structures and systems of power make it difficult to avoid dependence on others. He emphasizes the rarity of finding a place where one can live without causing harm or fearing harm, highlighting the difficulties of achieving true autonomy. Quote 172. Let us consecrate the 2 years until your return to choosing an abode in Europe where you can live happily with your family, sheltered from all the dangers of which I have just spoken to you. Rousseau proposes a plan for Emile to spend the next 2 years searching for a suitable place to settle down with his family, one that is free from the dangers of dependence, corruption, and societal pressures. He emphasizes the importance of finding an environment where Emile can live in peace and maintain his values, without being subject to the influences that could compromise his integrity. This plan reflects Rousseau's belief in the importance of carefully selecting one's environment as a means of preserving one's moral character and ensuring a happy and fulfilling life. It also underscores the idea that true happiness is found in a place where one can live according to one's principles, free from external threats and dependencies. Quote 173. All capitals resemble one another. All peoples are mixed together in them, and all morals are confounded. It is not to capitals that one must go to study nations. Paris and London are but the same city in my eyes. Rousseau argues that large cities, or capitals, fail to reflect the true character of a nation because they are melting pots where cultures mix, resulting in a blend of morals and behaviors that do not accurately represent the people as a whole. He suggests that capitals like Paris and London are essentially indistinguishable due to the similar cosmopolitan influences found within them. To truly understand the unique spirit and morals of a nation, one must go beyond the major cities to the countryside, where local customs and culture are less affected by outside influences and therefore more authentic. Rousseau emphasizes that the essence of a nation's identity lies in its rural regions, not its capitals. Quote 174. One must go to the remote provinces, where there is less movement and commerce, where foreigners travel less, where the inhabitants move around less and change fortune and status less, in order to study the genius and the morals of a nation. Rousseau suggests that to truly understand the character and morals of a nation, one must visit its remote areas, where the pace of life is slower, commerce is limited, and people are more likely to remain rooted in their communities. He believes that in such places, individuals are less influenced by external forces and changes in fortune, which makes them more representative of the authentic spirit of the nation. By observing people in these rural settings, Rousseau argues that one can gain a deeper understanding of the fundamental values and character traits that define a culture, as opposed to the diluted and cosmopolitan influence found in cities. Quote 175. The necessary relations between morals and government have been so well expounded in the book The Spirit of the Laws that one can do no better than have recourse to this work to study these relations. Rousseau acknowledges the work The Spirit of the Laws by Montesquieu as an authoritative source on the relationship between morals and government. He praises the book for its comprehensive analysis of how governmental structures influence the moral character of a people. Rather than attempting to elaborate on these ideas himself, Rousseau encourages readers to consult Montesquieu's work to understand the intricate connections between political systems and societal behavior. This endorsement reflects Rousseau's recognition of the importance of understanding the interplay between governance and moral values to fully grasp the dynamics of a society. Quote 176. In every country which is becoming depopulated, the state is tending toward its ruin, and the country which has the highest rate of population growth, even if it is the poorest, is infallibly the best governed. Rousseau argues that population growth is a key indicator of good governance. A country experiencing depopulation is likely headed for decline, as a shrinking population suggests instability and ineffective governance. Conversely, even a poor country that has a growing population demonstrates a government that successfully creates conditions conducive to family life and prosperity. For Rousseau, the well-being of a nation is reflected in its ability to support and encourage population growth, suggesting that a stable and growing populace is a sign of effective governance and a thriving society. Quote 177. It is big cities which exhaust a state and cause its weakness. The wealth they produce is only apparent and illusory, a lot of money that has little effect. Rousseau criticizes large cities for draining the resources of the state and contributing to its weakness. He argues that the wealth generated by big cities is deceptive, as it often does not translate into true prosperity for the nation. Instead, cities concentrate resources and wealth within their confines, creating the illusion of economic success while failing to distribute benefits equitably across the country. Rousseau believes that the uneven distribution of wealth and population weakens the state, as rural areas are left impoverished while cities grow rich, ultimately undermining the strength and stability of the entire nation. Quote 178. Study a people outside of its cities. It is only in this way that you will know it. Rousseau emphasizes that to truly understand a nation, one must look beyond its cities. He believes that cities are not accurate reflections of a nation's character, as they are influenced by a mix of cultures and the complexities of urban life. Instead, the countryside offers a clearer view of a nation's true values, customs, and way of life. By observing people in rural areas where life is simpler and less influenced by external forces, one can gain a genuine understanding of the nation's identity. Rousseau encourages looking at the broader population rather than being misled by the superficiality and cosmopolitan nature of urban centers. Quote 179. The closer they are to nature, the more their character is dominated by goodness. It is only by closing themselves up in cities and corrupting themselves by means of culture that they become depraved and exchange a few defects that are more coarse than harmful for appealing and pernicious vices. Rousseau argues that people who live closer to nature tend to have a character dominated by goodness, as they are less influenced by the corrupting forces of urban life. He suggests that cities, with their emphasis on culture and refinement, lead individuals away from their natural state and introduce vices that are both more appealing and more dangerous. While rural people may have coarse traits, these are often harmless compared to the sophisticated but destructive vices found in cities. Rousseau believes that the moral corruption associated with city life results from distancing oneself from nature, leading to a decline in genuine goodness and virtue. Quote 180. Freedom is found in no. It is in the heart of the free man. He takes it with him everywhere. The vile man takes his servitude everywhere. The latter would be a slave in Geneva, the former a free man in Paris. Rousseau asserts that true freedom is not dependent on a particular form of government, but resides within the individual. A person who has a free spirit carries that freedom with them, regardless of their external circumstances. Conversely, a person who lacks inner freedom will remain enslaved, no matter where they live. Rousseau suggests that one's attitude and moral strength determine whether they are truly free or not, rather than the political environment they inhabit. He implies that the pursuit of freedom is an internal journey, and even in a place like Paris, a person with a free heart can remain independent, while someone with a servile disposition will remain bound, even in a free society like Geneva. Emile, or On Education, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, concludes by reiterating the significance of fostering natural development and authenticity in learners. Through Emile's journey, Rousseau emphasizes that education must cultivate the child's innate capabilities, preparing them for the complexities of adult life, while respecting their individuality. The themes of nature, freedom, and the pursuit of genuine happiness resonate throughout, reminding us that true education is not about conformity, but about nurturing an individual's natural strengths and guiding them toward self-reliance, moral integrity, and fulfillment in society. This work challenges us to rethink how we educate our children, advocating for a balanced and humane approach that allows them to grow as complete human beings.
Curious to dive into the mind of Jean-Jacques Rousseau? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of Emile or On Education in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.